Seeker of Secrets, Coven of Shadows and Secrets, Book 1, by Ashley McLeo. Narrated by L.C. Johnson. Chapter 18. Tobias. I trailed down a dark, unnamed alley, not lost despite my many efforts to lose myself in the night. It had been a full day since I'd left New Haven, and Meredith Stone was fresh in my mind as if I'd just seen her. Her scent of jasmine mixed with fresh spring pine clung in my nostrils, and if I listened hard enough, I swore I could hear her voice among the chattering Parisians. A sigh gusted out of me. What on earth had drawn me here? I hadn't seen the City of Lights for years. Even when Luca booked missions here, I didn't volunteer. I avoided this place. Avoided her. The woman who could see me far too clearly. So why, when I was in tumult over another female, did I return here, to my second home? It made no sense, and yet here I stood on French soil. I stopped at yet another intersection between two alleyways, an uncomfortable, narrow affair filled with a mix of the reek of urine and the temptation of expensive perfume, the downtrodden and the decadent. Humans spoke of a wage gap widening with the years, but it had always been a reality. The internet just made it more starkly apparent. Even in Paris, a romanticized city, there had always been a cringeworthy juxtaposition of wealth and poverty. "Monsieur," a male voice came from behind. I twisted to find a short and pleasantly plump man. I'd bet he spent every morning devouring a croissant or two. A century ago, he would have been the exact type of human upon which I liked to feed. Slightly chubby humans tended to have the best flavor. But it had been a long time since I'd sipped from the vein, and this man didn't tempt me in the slightest. Nowadays, only one person tempted me, and I'd crossed an ocean to be free of her. Not that it worked. "Oui?" I asked. "Vous êtes perdu?" This man was a rare Parisian who worried over lost tourists. What a surprise. "Non. Merci." The man gave me a strange look, but left, throwing a couple of glances back my way. He didn't believe me. Understandable. I'd lived here once, but I'd been in the States a long time. I now walked like an American. My attire was less chic than it used to be. My French even sounded off. I had lost my French je ne sais quoi. But that didn't mean I didn't know Paris. Things here had changed, like every other place, but I still recognized every dark corner, every hidden bistro and bar where only creatures of the night crawled. The heart of the city continued to beat in a way that spoke to my heart, even as an outsider. Having lingered long enough, I turned right and continued to twist and turn through a few more alleys and streets before deciding it was time to settle for the evening. I popped out of the maze onto a thoroughfare, if one could call it that nowadays. It wasn't even as wide as many suburban neighborhood streets in the United States. Regardless, my eyes sought a door I hoped had not changed, and I smiled. A tavern I loved in my younger years was still there, with a green lantern hanging over its door, providing sanctuary to all who were not human. I crossed the street and entered. A bell jingled, announcing me as my gaze raked the area. Inside, the tavern looked the same as I remembered, dark and elegant. Fleur-de-lis wallpaper spoke of a long-forgotten era, one I wished to return to, if just for the evening. The bartender waved, and I went to the marbled bar, choosing a high-backed stool on the end. He smelled like a shifter, which meant he had a good nose. I asked for a wine recommendation, and after ordering a Burgundy, because when in Paris I always drank French wines, I closed my eyes and tried to lose myself in the atmosphere. The soft melody of a harp softened my shoulders, and slowly my breathing deepened. I was trying so hard to forget Meredith that when my past came up behind me, it caught me off guard. "Tobias Blake Aston Laurent. I sensed you looking around." I stiffened. Few people would use my vampire family name. Fewer still smelled of roses and the faint hint of basil, and almost no one had my devotion the way this woman did, though right now I'd hoped to avoid her at all costs. She was far too perceptive. Some even said that she'd been a seer before she was turned by a royal vampire, and her gift remained, though everything about my maker changed. The sign of my house, the royal house of Laurent, inked on me the day after my own change, itched as if the bloody snake was flicking its tail. I stifled a groan. I should have expected this. The bartender's gaze lifted to me, his expression shielded. No doubt he'd met the femme fatale behind me. He was clever to heed her with caution. She had been the one to show me this place, many years ago. I exhaled and turned, a forced smile on my face. Giselle, a pleasure.
Truly?
Giselle's green eyes glittered with amusement as she placed a hand on her hip. She didn't look any different from when I'd last seen her. Her loose blonde curls still barely graced her collarbone. Her heart-shaped face remained unlined, as it would forevermore, and green eyes glimmered with life. Her taste didn't seem to have changed either. My maker had always favored high-end fashion and luxury, which her dress and shoes reflected.
Because it seems as if you've walked all over Paris, everywhere except by my apartment. Are you avoiding me, Tobias?
Like the plague. Why would I be avoiding you?
I wondered as well. I thought, why would someone whom I've given the world to avoid me? I despise guessing games, so I figured I'd ask you myself.
My maker had never been one to beat around the bush. It was both refreshing and frustrating, particularly when I was on the receiving end. I'll admit, I've been trying to get away, but not from you. In fact, I wasn't even sure you were here. Nor did I wish to find out. Her stance softened. My answer had appeased her somewhat.
I returned from Esilia a month ago. It seems things are happening here that require my observance.
Don't they always?
Indeed. What are you running from?
A woman I can't pin down.
Some things never change.
I snorted. It had been an age since a woman had flummoxed me. I'd forgotten it was a common occurrence after I'd been turned. But Giselle had been there, guiding me back to sanity each time. Even the time the woman's death had nearly ushered in my own. So, the high and mighty Laurents have a job for you, do they? I asked, not wanting to talk to her about Meredith, nor dwell on the one I used to love. How long are you gone this time? Her lips pursed, and before answering me, she called to the bartender, "Cabernet!" He winked, and supplied her one immediately, as if he'd been waiting for her order.
Merci.
My maker gave the shifter a coquettish smile that could stop traffic, and took up the stool next to me.
Years ago, the blood of Laurent caught wind of someone trying to gather important magical objects.
Her tone was hesitant, as if she didn't want to share too much. Giselle descended from royalty, a cousin to the ruling vampire family in Isilia, thus making her a duchess, though she did not spend much time in Isilia asserting her rights. Her slender finger ringed her glass.
For a while now, I've been on the lookout for a septet of items entering the magical market.
A septet. 7 items. My hand tightened around my own glass, a reflex Giselle did not miss.
Any idea what I'm talking about, Tobias?
Depends on which magical object you are speaking of. There is no shortage of them in the world.
Nor in Isilia.
She leaned on the marble countertop.
But I've already told you a bit of my secret. I'll let you chew that over, for now it is time for you to tell me some of yours. I'll accept information about the woman, or the object you may, or may not, be hunting.
Damn. As ever, my sire knew, or suspected my business too well. I stared down at my drink, not wanting to meet her eyes, and unwittingly give away anything. Giselle didn't usually offer people choices, but as her child, I was gifted more leniency. The thing was, I couldn't inform her about the Pearl of Hell, the object I believe she was referring to, or at least one of the objects. I knew my cunning maker, and her appearance in this moment was just too perfect for me to believe otherwise. And I shouldn't tell her about Meredith either. At least, not everything about the young woman. Historically, Seekers drew attention, so eventually, Meredith's reputation would get out. When it did, other supernaturals would come looking for her. But the witch was in the Coven now, and we looked out for each other. Giselle must not learn about Meredith's powers before the witch was ready. No one could.
I grow impatient. Do I have to make you tell me? I prefer the information to come from you willingly. But I will take it if I must.
Bloody hell. I dared to look her in the eye to see if she meant it. All royal vampires, Laurent blood, could compel anyone but their maker and other siblings. The more distantly related a vampire was to its original royal, the more of a toss-up it was that they had the power of compulsion. Giselle could compel anyone, save for the royal family and other close cousins. I was not as strong, but still possessed the ability. Recently, fewer vampires had been made with that power, a fact that our race was hiding from the other supernaturals. They did not want to admit our defects. After studying Giselle for a moment, I deduced she wasn't bluffing. She'd compel me to learn what I knew, and if she compelled me, she might take too much, go too far. I'd rather offer something on my own terms, controlling the information I gave, and reduce the likelihood of her preying into other matters. I would merely have to trust that SNS would protect the new witch until she could do so herself. The woman, Meredith, she's a witch and new to our coven. There, it wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either, because Meredith was much more than your average witch.
Is that all?
Giselle said, eyebrow raised.
You don't fall for the regular sort. No girl next door or rule followers for you. What's special about her?
I haven't fallen for anyone in many years, I replied, shoving down the memory of the woman I'd given myself to. I so wished Giselle would drop this.
I am evidence of your exceptional taste.
For a moment her lips curled up smugly.
You've always liked the extraordinary woman. Answer me. What's extraordinary about this Meredith?
I chewed on the inside of my cheek, and then shrugged. Truth be told, I'm not sure. I've been acting strangely around her, protective but also dominant. I don't understand it. Another half-truth. Being a seeker was special, but I also had been acting protective and dominant, faintly insane. More like a teenage vampire than a mature adult. Giselle leaned back on her stool, relaxed as ever.
I see. There's more crossover between here and Esila than I would have imagined.
What do you mean? More than magical objects being hunted in both areas? She rolled her neck out, as if trying to squeeze a little relaxation out of her day.
Magical orders are forming unions, choosing outside of their own order for partners.
That's nothing special. Maybe 300 years ago it had been, but not since my change, and certainly not now. People dated and wed outside their supernatural orders all the time. And it has nothing to do with me and Meredith.
I think it does. These unions are stronger than most. The connection undeniable. And if you are here, your connection to this woman is strong.
When you say undeniable, she arched an eyebrow.
Fated mates, soulmates, blood-bound, whatever you want to call it.
My stomach swooped, and I shook my head. Impossible. Fated mates existed, but they were rare. People spoke of them as myths, legends nowadays.
It's true,
she pressed, reading the disbelief on my face like a book.
Most recently, a Fey prince learned a witch from your world was his soulmate.
I had forgotten about Cora, a fire witch in SNS who had fallen into the fairy realm of Esila and met the prince of the Spring Court. She'd married him, and now lived in his palace. I'd never been close to Cora and hadn't realized the prince was her soulmate. Still, it had to be an outlier. The fates had made an error, as Cora was a witch and the prince a fae. I wouldn't deny their bond, but I did not believe that because they were the exception, that I too would find my mate outside the vampire order.
You don't believe me,
Giselle said. A statement, not a question. Are there others?
All I know is that one union can usher in many. If that happens, it will undoubtedly alter our magic and what we become.
A soulmate bond was incredibly powerful, all-encompassing. Such a bind to another soul terrified me. I'd never experienced it, but after what I'd barely lived through in the past, I was certain I wasn't up for it. Not that it would be necessary. I did not believe that Meredith was my twin soul. To think that would be on par with believing one was a god. It was that rare. How ludicrous. Plus, she was far too aggravating to be my soulmate. We both know vampires don't have natural children like witches do, I reminded Giselle. So even if Meredith was my soulmate, we could never have children. And if that's the case, I'd be doing her a disservice by even telling her that others are finding mates outside their magical order.
You should ask her if she even wants them before you make assumptions. Not every woman longs for a child, you know.
She has no idea of our connection, and I don't plan on telling her.
Oh, of course. She has no idea, because you're the only one feeling something between you two. She's torturing you, but experiencing none of that confusion herself.
Giselle rolled her emerald eyes.
How typical of men. Be better, Tobias.
She's new to this world. Her magic has just been unbound, I countered. She could be mistaking whatever is between us for many things.
I assume she has 2 brain cells to rub together? If so, she has some idea.
I ignored her comment and raised a hand, signaling for the bartender. I needed another drink to drown out what I'd learned, and hopefully anything else Giselle would tell me this evening. I sensed she did not plan to leave, though I hoped I was wrong. A vampire can dream. Another glass of red wine landed in front of me, and I raised it to my nose. The bouquet was extraordinary, as the shifter bartender had claimed it would be. One didn't get wines like this in New Haven, not unless they had their own cellar. Shockingly, Giselle had fallen into silence too. Was she done shattering my reality for the evening? Or, hopefully, for the year? Better yet, the decade? I'd allowed my hopes to rise, when my maker turned her emerald-hard gaze on me.
I realize I might have upended your plans to wallow in Paris for God knows how long. But before you leave, I think there's something I should show you. It might have to do with this woman you find yourself drawn to, or it might not, but something is telling me it does.
I arched an eyebrow, and tried to hide the anxiety building within me at the prospect of anything happening to Meredith. I have no plans to leave.
You're not being honest with yourself,
about many things, Giselle said flatly.
Anyway, I possess information that might alter your course, but I cannot tell you anything here.
Her gaze swept the small bar, the few others enjoying their drinks. I frowned. All I'd wanted was to come to Paris to escape and get my head on straight. This place was a sanctuary. I'd travelled here as a sailor and adored the city. After I was turned, I came here as soon as I could travel without my maker. But my plans were as damned as my soul. Fate, that fickle mistress, had other ideas. My maker downed her wine, setting the glass on the table delicately, and called for the check.
Finish your glass, Tobias. I have something to show you, and I won't take no for an answer.
Chapter 19. Meredith. My pulse raced. Dens, my old partner in crime, had been here. Or had he? The person had left so fast, and I'd only seen his back. But those glasses, and the bomber jacket and the way he'd left. He'd touched the doorway up high, where most others did not. But Dens did that to steer clear of germs. I shuddered. It had to have been him. Did he see me? My gaze drifted to the table of Coven members. Normal people were watching the supernaturals, stealing glances every few seconds like we wouldn't notice. Together, we attracted human attention. Our otherness both drew them to us and frightened them. It was why, when supernaturals gathered in groups, they often preferred to do so in more private places, like secret societies in the heart of Yale. My gaze raked over the rest of the establishment. Our supernatural allure, combined with the fact that our table wasn't far from the bar, led me to believe Dens must have seen us. And if he did, he would have spotted me. The guy largely sucked at tomb raiding. I was faster and lighter of foot, so infiltrating had always been my job. However, he was very observant, which was why he was often my watchdog. Why hadn't he said anything when he saw me? Why hadn't he yelled at me for leaving him locked up in Egypt? Only one answer made sense, and it made my stomach churn. If Dens was here watching me, that meant the ringmaster wanted to keep tabs on me. Blazing balls of shit! I bolted across the bar, determined to catch up with Dens. Before I reached the door, Hans intercepted me, eyes wide. "What's happening? Gunnar smelled your panic." I tilted my head. Shifters can smell emotions? Some. Alphas can, if the emotions are powerful. According to Gunnar, yours are off the charts. I let out a breath. I saw my old raiding partner. Tobias and I left him in jail in Egypt. He slipped outside just now, but he had to have noticed us. Noticed me. Hans turned toward the door. Glass expanded across the top half, allowing him to see outside a little bit. He didn't say anything, and now he's gone? Exactly. I have to find him, I insisted. He's out of prison, obviously, and still works for the ringmaster. Dins owed less money than me, a fact he'd let slip one drunken night. Still, he'd be in the ringmaster's employ for another year. Actually, our failure to complete our last job had probably added to his term of servitude. My blood ran cold. He'd be pissed about that. I'm in debt to my old boss, I said, because I wasn't sure if Harper and Shade had told others besides Luca. Now, it was time to let everyone in on my embarrassing secret. Major debt, Hans, and he won't let that slide. He's a dangerous man. The Coven has money. We'll pay whatever you owe, Hans assured me, not seeming surprised. So he already knew. My cheeks flushed with heat. You don't have to worry, Meredith. The Coven helps out its members. It might be too late, I admitted. My old boss could have sent Dens to scout me. If he confirms I'm here, the ringmaster will... I stopped, not able to choke out the real lengths to which my old boss would go. Shaking my head, I finished. No more secrets. Hans needed to know. We need to clear this up fast. He hires assassins. Hans swallowed, and his gaze shifted back to our table. Gunnar, he called, his voice slightly elevated. Thanks to his keen shifter hearing, the wolf stood and marched in our direction. Harper, Shay, and Sarah followed, not far behind. You okay? Sarah, the necromancer I'd met that night, whispered to me. I nodded, though I didn't feel that way at all. I wanted to get on with it and find Dens. What's up? Gunnar leaned against the wall, so we looked like a group of people just casually hanging out. Meredith's old raiding partner stopped by and didn't say hello. We need to find him, or our boss might send assassins. Gunnar's gaze latched onto me. Damn, girl. Everyone's trying to get you. First the Shade, then that vampire, and now your old boss. Tell me about it. Antiquities theft has never been a safe profession, but this is ridiculous, I muttered. I'm up to track him down. You in, hot stuff? Gunnar threw Harper a flirty grin. She rolled her eyes and ignored him, which only made him smile harder. From what I could tell, he loved getting her goat. Given how rigid Harper was, it wasn't that difficult. Can't I do this, though? I asked. I'm a seeker. I should be able to find him, right? Hans shook his head. Seekers can easily find magical objects, as long as they haven't been obscured by a spell. People are a different matter. An image in your mind isn't going to cut it. And so many humans come in and out of this place, they'd obscure traces of other people. The only way it would be easier for you to find your old partner than a shifter is if you had some of Dens's hair or fingernails. Please say you don't. Shay cut in, sounding super grossed out. My nose wrinkled. We weren't into the whole exchanging body parts thing.
Thank goodness.
What does he look like? Shay asked. Medium height, balding? I said. He always wears those Terminator-style glasses, and tonight he had on a leather bomber jacket that was almost too small. So he's kind of a standout, Shay said. Not many bombers running around New Haven. No, I agreed. Then another thought struck that I hadn't considered before. Wait. Can I find something if someone is holding it? What are the limits?
According to books I've read, if an object is inside a person, you would not be able to find it.
Like if they swallowed it? I asked, grossed out by the thought.
Yeah, or implanted it in their skin, like a piercing or body mod type of thing,
Harper replied. But if it's in their pocket or somewhere on their body, you'd be able to. Excluding enchantments on their body and other limits, of course. Hans replied. No one knows too much about those. Why?
Because there hasn't been a seeker in so long, Harper replied, ginger brows pinched together.
Didn't anyone tell you how rare your kind is? I frowned, not appreciating her attitude. Yeah, but... The point is, Hans interrupted, probably sensing the spike in my tone. In this instance, shifters are our best bet. The wizard nodded to Gunnar and Harper. Thankfully, these two have excellent noses. You really think you can find this guy? Gunnar let out a bark of a laugh. But where he sounded optimistic, Harper looked skeptical. Her arm swung behind her to encompass the bar. Dude, there are tons of humans in here. We don't know his scent. Gunnar may think he's a wolf god, but you have to give us something to go on. I thought back to when I saw Dens leave, and pointed higher on the doorframe. He touched that spot when he opened the door. He's always been a bit of a germaphobe, so he avoids handles as much as he can. Understandable, Shay piped up. People are nasty. Harper glanced around. I don't want to sniff the door. Not here. Gunnar shrugged. I'll do it. The wolf shifter approached the door, and even though Harper had claimed she didn't want to, she went with him. The pair pretended to have a conversation, their nostrils aimed toward the door occasionally, twitching slightly. Finally, Gunnar nodded. Let's go, but maybe not all of us. He looked at Sarah. You guys should stay. Have Dan or Gus sent the door and be on the lookout. If someone who matches Dens' description comes back, call us.
Good thinking.
Sarah darted back to the table, relaying the message to the bear shifters who'd been watching. The rest of us left the Griffin and plunged into the streets of New Haven to find my old partner. The wolves led the way, scenting at the air. Shay, Hans, and I chatted, trying to detract from the wolves' intensity and make the crew look normal. With each block, I kept my eyes peeled for Dens. He couldn't have gone far. The guy wasn't in great shape, so I didn't foresee him running anywhere. Then again, he wouldn't want me to catch him. If the ringmaster was after me, Dens would have been told to be covert, and failure to comply would only lead to pain for my old partner. Again, my stomach twisted uncomfortably. Now, I had the backing of the Coven, but the ringmaster had always terrified me. He had friends in high places, and he wasn't opposed to torture, or jumping straight to murder, though I was trying really hard not to think about either. We'd gone 5 or 6 blocks when Gunnar turned back to me, his eyebrows furrowed. Are you sure this guy is human? The question hit me like I'd run into a brick wall. I hadn't even known I was a witch. How would I have realized if Dens was something else? Would he have told me? No. Dens and I worked jobs together, but we weren't friends. Some things, like our past and how we came to the ringmaster, had never been discussed. It was too painful. She's too new to this to have any idea, Hans said, echoing my thoughts. Did you lose the trail? Yeah. Harper's keen gaze scanned all around. It's sort of thin to nothing. I've experienced nothing like it. I pivoted in place, taking in the area. We were in a small square on campus, an open and empty place at this time of night. Dens was nowhere in sight. My troubled emotions amplified, threatening to burst out of me. I inhaled, pushing down the rising tumult as I tried to keep my head. It was too much of a coincidence that my old partner had been in the same bar as me, and very telling that he had slipped out without saying anything. Clearly, he'd been tracking me, but wasn't quite ready to make a move. Was I too late to pay up? My mouth dried up. One thing was certain. I needed to watch my back. Chapter 20. Tobias. Giselle halted before an old apartment building, one of the classics of Paris that had likely once housed the poor who had no means to afford country homes. Now it stood proud, transformed into many high-end flats for the uber-wealthy. She entered the lobby, which was decorated in white marble, and threw a wave at the attendant. He set down his café. "Bonsoir, Mademoiselle Giselle."
Bonsoir, Armand.
She beamed at him as we stuffed ourselves into the tiny elevator and rode up to her penthouse suite. We stepped out, and the scent of black currant hit me in the face. The vampires rarely appreciated artificial scents. They were too strong for our sensitive noses. Giselle had always loved black currant.
Have you been here before, Tobias? I can't recall.
That's a sure sign you own too many homes. She rolled her eyes.
It's more of a sign that I don't remember the last time I saw my favorite child.
I snorted. Don't tell Raphael or Serena.
I tell Raphael he's my favorite child to mollify him. You know how moody he gets.
And Serena?
She's the smart one.
My maker gave me an amused look as she made her way to a table littered with papers.
But truly, you are the favored one, even when you're hiding from me.
I didn't respond, only joined her at the table. From a drawer beneath the wooden expanse, she pulled out what appeared to be a map. Unfurling it, she pinned down the edges. My gaze scanned the parchment. It was an old-world map, but not so old it deserved to be in a museum. Probably something Giselle had had lying around for 100 years, collecting dust. "What's all this about?" I asked. Her finger pressed down on the parchment, right on Egypt.
I told you people were looking for specific items, but not what. I sense you know what they are, which is good because I can't tell you outright anyhow. I'm bound to my royal vow. I can, however, tell you that there are 7. They were once held by angels, and an organization called the Ordo Eternum is interested in acquiring all of them.
7 items, created by angels. So yes, the lapis calesti. There have been rumors of their interest in dark magical artifacts for centuries, I said. This wasn't news to me, nor anyone in S&S.
And I can verify those rumors because, for the last 5 years, I've been a double agent for that organization.
Why are you playing spy? I asked, treading lightly.
The royal blood of Laurent wants certain items too. The same 7.
She gave me a pointed look, making it quite clear we were talking about the same thing, albeit cryptically.
The king, in particular, is possessed with the idea. If they have to come down against the Ordo Eternum to get them, they will.
I didn't think my blood could get any colder. My maker had always been loyal to her family, but perhaps helping them attain the 7 celestial stones, or even one of them, was going too far. What do they want them for? I asked, when she didn't answer. To create a new world order, like the Ordo Eternum is rumored to desire? Doesn't the blood of Laurent hold enough power?
They believe the time for those items to see the light is drawing closer. Signs are cropping up everywhere.
Has an oracle proclaimed it? Oracles did not exist in this world, or at least not that I was aware of. Not because there weren't any, but because they hid. They were almost as highly sought after as seekers. My pulse quickened. The idea of the Laurents coming after Meredith was even more frightening than the Ordo Eternum searching for her.
There is one in Isila. She spent her life traveling with the rogue Fae band of the Summer Court. But one gave her up and sold her to the highest bidder, which, unsurprisingly, was the Laurence.
Giselle shrugged. Did you meet her on your last visit? How long had this fae been captive?
Before that, years ago.
Why am I just hearing of it then?
Before it didn't seem important, but now...
Giselle trailed off for a moment.
The Oracle foresaw 7 beings holding the angels' creations and keeping them safe. All have been born.
She patted the map for a moment, as if considering what to say next. Then Giselle's green eyes turned on me.
You don't want to admit it yet, but it is clear to me you care about this woman. She probably has something to do with all this, because, as I said, you only have eyes for exceptional women.
Giselle swallowed.
If I'm right, I want you to know so you can keep her safe. I might not be around to help you if anything should happen to her. I wish to protect you, as best I can.
My skin grew cold at the reminder of the past. How my maker had been the only one able to pull me from the depths of my despair. Why would you guess we're after one of those items?
The Odo Eternum has eyes everywhere, Tobias.
She paused.
Regarding the Laurence, you will tell no one what you've learned here?
As you wish. No child wanted to go against the will of their sire, for to do so was very painful. Are you working with the Ordo Eternum for the foreseeable future? Giselle's gaze trailed back down to the map. Only then did I notice an aggressively circled red dot right where her finger had been. It was near Cairo, the same city magic had radiated from when the Pearl of Hell was unearthed. The same place I had found Meredith. Again, a sensation of dread washed through me. My attention ran over the rest of the map, spying at least 24 other dots, though some had been crossed out.
At the rate we're going, I will be with them for a while.
She looked to the map.
I brought you here for privacy. They really do have ears everywhere, and so you could see how dedicated we are to the search. It is a sort of mania in the Order, and if you've put 2 and 2 together, like I suspect you have, you now know they realize one of the septets was in Cairo.
Of course they do. They took it, didn't they?
Actually, no.
What? Did the Laurence actually get their hands on it? And if so, why are you just telling me? But that makes no sense. Who else is searching? We know of no other person or group interested in the celestial stones. I paused at the slip-up, but soon realized how little it mattered. We both knew what we were talking about. If anything, the absolute confirmation that came with an answer or none would be welcome.
We're not sure,
Giselle replied, eyebrows arched at my slip-up, but indulging me with information all the same.
The Order got a tip from an anonymous source.
She stared at me intently.
The OA checked out the site later. Whoever took the item left a calling card.
She picked up a pencil and began to sketch a symbol, starting with an upside-down triangle with an X drawn from the top 2 corners until the lines of the X strayed outside the confines of the shape. Giselle then moved on to the singular bottom point of the triangle, extending those lines a bit past the tip and curling them outward. Finally, she drew a small V to intersect the triangle's extensions. When she set her pencil down, I shook my head in disbelief. The sigil of Lucifer? I haven't seen that in ages. What does it mean in this context?
We're not certain, but surely an ancient Egyptian did not carve it into the tomb's entrance.
No. Whoever did it must have done so after they knocked out Dens, and before Meredith surfaced from the tomb. I looked my maker in the eye. Why did you tell me all this?
A soft breath left her. I can't speak in specifics, but I don't always agree with my family. And I certainly do not support the Ordo Eternum, though I will pretend because my family bid me to do so. Therefore I must act in their interests. Ultimately, I want to keep you safe. I joked earlier, but you really are my favorite child. My greatest wish is to keep the royals of Isila out of this realm and away from any of my children.
Her lips curled up.
And by extension, I care for the woman who seems to mean a lot to you.
Of course she does. I said, though the witch disconcerted me more than anything. She is a colleague. I should return to New Haven. My hand scrubbed the back of my neck. My Coven master will want to be filled in. Giselle's lips twitched. You do that, Tobias. She gestured to the heavily circled map. Obviously, the Ordo Eternum isn't sure where to go next. But that doesn't mean we won't figure it out. And just know, if you and I see each other while I'm working for the Ordo Eternum on behalf of the Laurents, I will have to make the fight appear realistic. I understand I'm on my own. A sense of disquiet spider-walked down my spine as Giselle's green eyes latched onto me like those of a hawk. Being at odds with my maker, and with the blood of Laurent, was a terrifying prospect. Chapter 21. Meredith. I pulled back the curtains and peered outside for the 10th time that morning. You're beginning to look a touch crazy, Benedict drawled from where he lounged on his new memory foam cat bed, complete with a built-in pillow. No one has spotted him since that night. Him who? There were 2 hims on my mind, and I hated to think the cat knew one of them. Dens, of course. A huff parted my lips, and I pulled the curtain firmly closed. I know that, but that doesn't mean he isn't around waiting. You claim he was not stealthy, and that you never got a good look at his face. What if it wasn't actually him? Dens wasn't stealthy. That was true. That was one reason I had a hard time believing it was him at the bar, watching me while I was oblivious. As for only seeing his back, it was another claim I couldn't fight. Was I seeing things? Or was Benedict trying to get a rise out of me? He did have a track record for being contrary. Are you calling me paranoid? I asked the cat as I swept into my bathroom. Never. You have a lot on your mind, and you're clearly scared that the ringmaster will find you. I don't think you're paranoid, but fear can make us think differently. So do you think perhaps you imagine dens because you're on edge? I don't know. The ringmaster doesn't mind playing the long game. I sighed, running my brush through my long brown hair. Whether I did or didn't, you're right. I always am. I ignored him. I can't keep living like this. It's only been 2 days since I saw Dens, and I'm exhausted from keeping watch. As am I. You woke me up 3 times last night with your pacing, looking out the window, and tossing and turning. I rolled my eyes and set down my brush to pluck eye brightener out of my makeup bag. Gently, I applied it to the dark circles beneath my eyes. I'm sure you'll make up for it today, lazing about here. Benedict usually came to the Coven's hall with me and snoozed in a patch of sun while I trained. But I wouldn't be doing that, at least not right away. You can stay in your outrageously priced bed while I'm at Yale's orientation, schmoozing with people who think I'm like them. Sounds awful. Benedict hopped up onto the counter, a look of disgust on his feline face. I've had my fill of non-magicals for a lifetime. All the baby talk is nauseating. Will you be training afterward? Han said to swing by after orientation, but he also said not to rush. Apparently, it's important for me to be seen on campus. So important, Luca had insisted I skip morning training, when normally that wouldn't have flown. I'll probably go by the hall at... Rooms! Shay shouted from the bottom of the stairs. Hurry up! We'll be late! Coming! I turned back to the cat. I'll be at the hall later, but don't feel like you have to go. The window is open if you want to slip out, but like I said, no pressure. I applied a quick sheen of lip gloss before snapping my crossbody bag up off the floor and rushing out of my bedroom. Harper and Shay were both waiting for me at the bottom of the stairs. Harper wore jeans, a tank, and an emerald cardigan to complement her flaming locks. Shay had opted for a red maxi dress and sandals. The girl was still clinging to summer, and luckily, the weather was obliging today. That's what you're wearing? Harper asked, eyebrows pinched together. What? You can't go wrong with jeans. I gestured at my all-black attire. And this is a crop top. Those are in, right? You look so goth. I prefer the term rocker, I corrected her. You'll stand out for sure.
Luca wants us to be noticed, so that's a good thing,
Shay reminded her.
I think you look cute. I'd do a red lip, but whatever.
Didn't have time to do it properly, I said, though I totally agreed. I loved a good red lip. Aren't we worried about being late?
Yes.
Harper turned. Let's go.
Be good, Benny,
Shay called out. As the door shut behind us, the cat loosed a long hiss. Shay needed to watch it with the nicknames, or she'd come home to her bed in tatters one day. The moment we stepped outside, my gaze shifted right, then left. I exhaled. No one even remotely resembling Dens was around. Our little street was quiet, like usual.
Still worried?
Shay asked softly. My cheeks warmed, a little embarrassed she'd caught me in a weak moment. I know Luca had a team do a thorough search, but that guy just looks so much like Dens.
We're going to take care of you.
Shay's insistence tied my stomach in knots. I wasn't used to others looking out for me, and I still wasn't sure how to handle it.
If we see anyone even slightly resembling the picture you showed us, you better believe he'll be locked in the Coven's dungeon.
Dungeon? I sputtered. A repurposed basement where we keep enemies until they can be transported to a proper holding facility, Harper said matter-of-factly. Except once, a Coven member who had been possessed stayed there until an exorcism was done. I gaped. You haven't seen all of our tomb yet. I hadn't thought that I had, but a dungeon felt so old world, so dark. When you say proper holding facilities, do you mean a magical prison? I asked. That, or a form of stasis, like being locked in a block of magic. Harper didn't blink, though both ideas made me shudder.
In our world, punishments are more severe, because when supernaturals use their power for bad, they can cause major harm,
Shay explained.
Not that humans can't, but it's just different.
Right. I stopped the conversation there and shrugged off the chill gripping my spine as we made our way closer to campus. The sounds of students hit my ears when we were still a block away. For the last 10 minutes, people had been streaming around us or past us, having already gotten their fill of orientation, even though it started only a half hour ago. I inhaled deeply, centering myself before I had to be around a metric shitload of people.
You blue booked already, right?
Shay asked.
Did your net ID work?
Luca had pulled some serious strings to get me into the school and registered through the class catalog site in a few short days. An impressive feat, considering he still looked like hell. Yep. I'm signed up for 4 intro classes and 1 history elective. Women Who Ruled. I loved the sound of that one. You don't have to start with all the intro stuff, you know, Harper said. You can take others if you want. I know. She was being kind, thinking perhaps I didn't realize the level of flexibility I had since I was new to college life. The thing was, it had been a long time since I'd gone to school, and I was now going to be attending Yale. Though I was a confident woman, and smart in my own way, I was totally feeling the imposter syndrome.
If they're too easy, she can switch later.
Shay looped her arm through mine. I smiled. We'll see. We turned the corner, and suddenly came face to face with mobs of students, all bright-eyed as they checked out the tables scattered across the lawn, greeted old friends, or dashed inside beautiful Gothic buildings for major specific meetups. They all looked so ready for the term to begin in a week, so like they belonged. My stomach pitted. These people walking the aisles in the green, manning the tables, handing out bags of buttery popcorn, all looked different from me. And though I hadn't met a single one, I knew they saw the world differently, too. The only people who could relate to me were those who had worked for the ringmaster. Case in point, I was looking for Dens, a man surely sent to find my location and pass it on to a killer. Where to? I asked, trying to shove down my fear.
It doesn't matter,
Shay said.
Let's dive in.
She sashayed forward, and Harper and I trailed behind. Despite there being many people around, eyes snagged on us, unable to resist the lure of a witch, a wolf, and a Nephilim together. The tables outside advertised campus activities. We trailed from one table to the next, and a half hour later my shoulders were just starting to loosen when Shay announced she needed to use the restroom. "I'll go too," Harper said. "I'll stay here. Talk to some people." The more we were seen, the sooner we could leave. Or at least, that's how I hoped this worked. "Sounds good," Shay said. "We don't need to make a million connections. Just be memorable. Having people know we go to Yale is a good cover." Right. I eyed a table cluttered with rocks and tiny shovels. The archaeology club. A natural fit, considering my past. I'm going to check that out. See you soon. The pair left, and though there was a ton of people around, the moment they were gone, I felt more exposed. And strangely, though the stare should have lessened, I sensed someone watching me. For one vulnerable moment, I considered chasing after my roommates, but didn't want to look like a chicken shit who couldn't handle being alone. I was not that kind of girl. I could handle this on my own. They wouldn't always be around to babysit me. Even as I gave myself a pep talk, I once again scoured the green for Dens. As ever, he wasn't there. And yet, the sensation of being watched remained, tightening my chest. I needed a distraction. I strolled to the table I'd spotted earlier. Surely, Yale's archaeology club would be able to teach a girl who dabbled in ancient civilizations and classics a thing or two. "Hey!" A young man with buck teeth and a strong jawline beamed at my approach. "Are you interested in archaeology?" "I am." Images of the latest tomb I'd raided flashed through my mind. I like the quirkier stuff. If one could call cursed necklaces quirky. "Cool." He picked up a pamphlet, handing it to me. "Then you might like our club. Let me give you the rundown." The young man proceeded to talk my ears off about the days of the week the archaeology club met, and their yearly digs, which involved going into the nearby hills and excavating. "You don't try to go on real digs, like in Egypt?" The man chuckled. "Some do. They're anthro majors, though. We're a hobbyist club, so we mostly do local stuff. Sometimes we find artifacts from colonial times." Kinda lame. I didn't want to waste my time digging into the side of a hill on the off chance I might find something. I held up the pamphlet. "Thanks for this. I'll think about it. Hope to see you at the first meeting." I turned and threw him a wave over my shoulder as I walked back toward where the girls had left me. Harper and Shay hadn't returned. Were the bathrooms a mile away or something? Before I could investigate, I spotted a woman with reddish blonde hair waving at me. I squinted, taking in the woman and the black man she strolled alongside. Finally, recognition dawned over me. They were two necromancers from my coven, one of whom could see through the eyes of ravens. I'd met them at the Griffin the night I thought I saw Dens. "Hey!" I called out. Sarah and Josiah veered off the path they'd been on and came over, hand in hand. So I had been right that they were dating.
"How's orientation?" Sarah asked. "I remember when I did this. I kinda miss it."
"Good," I said simply. Sarah's lips curled up.
"Are you okay? After the Griffin?"
"Totally not." "Yeah," I lied. "People are looking for him." "We are," Josiah assured me. "So you don't go to classes?" I asked, trying to avoid the topic of Dens, and genuinely curious. Not all Coven members did, but they looked about my age.
"I did last year, but graduated," Sarah said. "I'm working in a lab now for my cover. Joe works there too."
She nudged the other necromancer and grinned. They were cute together. "Speaking of the lab, sorry we can't stay," Josiah said, looking at his watch. "My timer's about to go off. We gotta run. Have fun with this." He waved his hand in the direction of orientation. "Sure," I said. "See you later." They left, and though I'd still wanted to hide my past from them, the strange feeling of really belonging to a group washed over me. This was all so new to me. Before coming to New Haven, I couldn't remember just bumping into someone I knew randomly. All this newness was so weird. I pulled in a long breath. letting it go slowly as I turned back to the sea of tables and scanned for my roommates, who were still nowhere to be seen. Not ready to try another table, I decided it was time for a break. Spotting a large oak at the far end of the green, I strolled over to it, shooting the girls a text so they could find me when they came back. I leaned against the tree and slid down to sit on my rear. It was far away enough from the tables and hubbub that I felt somewhat alone. A long exhale parted my lips. Finally, some peace and... "Look what the alley cat dragged in," a posh voice drawled, making me shudder. "I could tell it was you from a mile away by your trampy walk." I glanced up to find none other than Dickwad Bentley looming over me, his eyes narrowed with disgust. I groaned. "What do you want? That's not how you should speak to your betters." "I'll keep that in mind when I see someone fitting that description." "Someone should teach you some manners, freshman." Bentley thrust out his hand to grab for me. "What the hell, man?" I tried to bat his hand away, but he was quick. He placed a firm palm on my shoulder, pressing me down as he lowered to my level. When he'd settled into a crouch, he knelt over my extended legs, his face separated from mine by mere inches. "Hitting your superiors isn't very nice. It was Meredith, wasn't it?" I snorted. "As if you could forget my name. Now let me go, or I'll scream." He chuckled humorlessly. "You wouldn't. I can tell you're not that kind of girl." Damn it, he was right. I wasn't the screaming type. Not unless something really scared the crap out of me. This interaction didn't qualify, although I was certain I wouldn't be strong enough to push him away. "Now, let's see about the stunt you pulled at the bar, Meredith." He licked his lips. "Your little tantrum could have really hurt me, and you don't want to do that. You see, my father is a powerful man, and we have endless resources." I stiffened, recalling his last name was Sloan, the same as a very influential senator from New York. One running for president soon. Even if SNS was as powerful as I thought, taking on a senator might be a whole other matter. "I see you've heard of my family." Bentley smirked. "Good. Now, let's discuss how you can right your wrongs." He cupped his crotch with his free hand, and his lips curled into an icy smile that didn't reach his eyes. I nearly vomited. "You've got to be screwing with me." "Only if you ask nicely." "Absolutely not," I spat back. "And I don't apologize. What would your father think if he heard you followed women to the bathroom like a psycho?" Bentley's expression hardened for a moment, before the cruel smile slipped back over his face. "You didn't give me a chance. I invited you to sit with us, and you didn't even consider it. Everyone deserves a chance, don't they?" "Actually, no." Bentley's lips curled up a little more. "Agree to disagree. And I know." His hand slipped down from my shoulder, inching toward my breast. "I want another chance with you, Meredith. Let me take you out. Then we can discuss how you'll treat me. And how I'll treat you, if you're a good girl." I slapped his wandering hand away and spit in his face. "Let me go! Now!" Both of Bentley's hands slammed to my shoulders to press me back against the oak. Would anyone see this? Immediately, I knew they wouldn't. I'd come over here because it was quiet and secluded. And from the way he crouched, Bentley probably looked like he was about to kiss me, not threaten me. If anyone saw us, it was like they'd think we wanted privacy. Ew! "Now listen here, you little bitch," he growled. "You don't want me as an enemy?" Suddenly, my magic flickered to life inside me, and I gasped as my heart began to beat faster. My power had never done that before, and I truly didn't know what to make of it. Not until I recalled Hans telling me that magic might act on its own accord to save a person. "Not now," I begged, desperate to make it stop, even though I'd like nothing more than to fling Bentley across the green. His shock and humiliation would bring me great satisfaction, but if my magic evoked it, that would probably only cause a headache for S&S. Even if Bentley was a bonesman and would learn about magic users this year, that was in a totally different context, one that would bind him to secrecy. Alas, my power was as stubborn as me and didn't listen. The sensation of warmth, of strength, built inside me until I worried it would burst from me. Then the air began to hum softly. Bentley noticed a shift. He hadn't let go of me, but his gaze darted from side to side, as if looking for what could be causing the disturbance. "What the hell are you doing, slut?" he whispered. "Let me go," I warned. "If you don't, you might get hurt." "I doubt that very much." "Hey!" Suddenly, Bentley Sloane III was lifted from my shoulders and soaring backward 15 feet to land on his ass on the ground. His eyes blazed up at the person who'd pulled him off of me, and my gaze followed. A sharp breath filled my lungs as I locked eyes with Tobias, who looked about ready to kill the senator's son. I hadn't seen the moody vampire since our training session, the day he'd pressed his fangs to my skin. Though I'd heard he was around again and had taken a meeting with Luca, he seemed to be avoiding me. So why was he here now? "She said, leave her alone." Tobias's voice rumbled in a way that made the hair on my arms stand up. If Bentley wasn't such an idiot, he'd already be running. But he wasn't sprinting away, which made me think he wasn't that smart at all. Maybe someone had pulled strings to get him into Yale, too. "You'll be hearing from my lawyer." Bentley thrust a finger at the vampire. "No one lays a hand on me that way." Tobias barked out an unamused laugh, and for one terrifying moment, his emerald eyes glowed. The outrage on Bentley's face dipped into fear. "What's wrong with you, man?" "You don't want to know," Tobias said. "Now, the lady said to leave her alone. I suggest running along to cry to your father now." He made a dismissive hand gesture, as if Bentley was nothing more than a child. "What are you, her weird older brother or something?" Bentley scowled. "I'm much scarier," Tobias said. "Now go, unless you want me to hurl you into the Beinecke." Something in his tone must have finally gotten through Bentley's thick skull, because he stood and began to back away. As he did so, he threw me another glance. "This isn't over." "Yes, it is," Tobias snarled. Bentley whirled, and picking up his pace, strode across the green, not looking back again. I exhaled, watching him retreat. Tobias did the same, and in that second I was able to pull myself together enough to face the other man who, just days ago, had tried to scare me. He'd dared to press his fangs to my neck and then, poof, disappeared. So when he turned and looked at me, smiling as if nothing had happened between us, I was surprised. But I didn't show it. Didn't miss a beat. Not even when he held out his hand to help me up. I refused the assist and rose to my feet on my own accord. Tilting my chin up, I asked, "What are you doing here, Tobias? And why do you think I need your help?" Chapter 22. Tobias. A muscle ticked in my jaw as I stared down at Meredith. The way her eyes blazed, one would have thought she was a fire witch, not a seeker. She had guts, and she smelled bloody irresistible. Luckily for her, I downed a liter of blood before searching for her, knowing she might invite my hunger again. So far, my preemptive snack was working. My desire to hunt, to dominate, were quelled. I still wanted to put her in her place, but that was the dominance in me calling, a natural occurrence in all apex predators. But I was more than a predator. I could control my impulses. And with her, I would get great practice in doing so. "Don't vampires have good hearing?" Meredith snapped. "Excellent." "Then answer me. Why butt in? Did it look like I needed your help? There's no shame in needing help, Stone. I dodged the question. Was I sure she would have handled Bentley eventually? Yes. Had I been able to hold back my instincts to protect the witch? No. The urge to hunt and dominate were lessened, but not the desire to shield her, which made no sense. And yet, here I was. The witch's eyes narrowed. For the record, I had it handled. And even if I didn't, I don't think you should be the one helping me. You threatened me too. Inwardly, I cringed. About my actions the other day? When you pressed your fangs into my neck? Yes, that. I inhaled slowly. I regret scaring you. I apologize. For a moment, she stared at me, fire still blazing in those blue and green eyes. It was uncalled for, I added, feeling uncharacteristically unsure of how to proceed. I can't even explain why I did it. Giselle had given one theory, but I still didn't believe it. More than that, if it was true, Meredith didn't need to know. Vampires and witches, or any type of mortal, didn't belong together. I'd ventured down that path once, and it hadn't ended well. Fine. I accept your apology. And I do appreciate you tossing that little shit to the ground, though I still think I could have handled him. Now, please get out of my way. I need to go find Shay and Harper. She tried to push past me, but I shifted to stand in front of her. Wait. I didn't just happen upon you. I have a message. Spit it out, then. Lucas says it's time for your first mission. We're to report to the Skull and Bones tomb. Her eyebrows pinched together. Like right now? Yes. Are they always on such short notice? No, but this one is. She huffed. Fine. I still have to tell the girls, though. I don't think they've checked their phones. I lifted my gaze to the table across the green. Immediately, I spotted the red-haired wolf and the brunette Nephilim. They did seem to be searching for Meredith among the chaos of new students. There they are, I pointed. Be quick about it. How about we cool it on the commands? Meredith said, walking toward her friends and waving. The pair saw her and met the witch halfway. I knew the moment Meredith mentioned her mission because Shay clapped her hands together. Then Meredith jerked a thumb in my direction, and the girls peered around her. Harper nodded, while Shay narrowed her eyes at me. Apparently, the excitable Nephilim had heard about our training session. Thankfully, the unlikely pair didn't follow Meredith back over. When she stood before me once again, she shoved her hands into her pockets. Ready. Very well. We strode through campus until we made our way onto the streets of New Haven. Though I was used to long silences, and usually relished them, with each step I sensed the tension in Meredith rise. Presumed it would soon bubble over. We'd turned onto High Street, when she reached a boiling point, stopping and whirling to face me. Where did you go? She demanded. Pardon me? You left. How do you know? She blinked, the effect surprisingly innocent and soft, a chink in the armor Meredith usually wore. A protective instinct inside me stirred. Hastily, I pushed it down. Feeling this way toward her was absolutely ridiculous. We barely knew one another. Not to mention, I was dealing with a witch. A new one, yes, but even before she was apprised of her powers, she was a woman fully capable of caring for herself. As she'd insisted earlier, Meredith was no damsel in distress. She might be a stone, but steel twisted through her veins. I was sure of it. Shay told me you returned yesterday, she said finally, sharply, which means you left. I was in Paris, I replied. Why? Some places just call to me. As it turned out, the choice was fortuitous. Why do you say that? For a moment, it almost sounded like she forgot she was annoyed. I learned the Ordo Eternum did not take the pearl. How can you be sure? A trusted source. You're not going to tell me who, are you?
I shook my head. "Luca knows the pertinent details they've given us, and he'll pass them along in due time. But my source stays a secret. Giselle had given us information freely, but she was my maker, someone I cared for, even if I preferred to avoid her because she saw me too clearly. Families, even vampire ones, were complicated, but I would not compromise Giselle's position as an agent for the OA."
"A source in Paris," Meredith mused. "Are you like a vampire lord with mistresses?"
My gaze slid to her. Sometimes she said the strangest things. "No. Where did you think I went?" My lips twitched up as her lips compressed.
"Not that I was dwelling on it much."
The witch glanced away as if she couldn't care less.
"But if I did, I would have guessed you'd holed up at home, took to your coffin or whatever."
"We don't sleep in coffins. But in a sense, I was home," I admitted as we approached the Skull and Bones Hall. "Here we are." She kept pace with me down the walk as I climbed the steps to the door, which opened before we could knock. A man wearing slacks and a sweater appeared, and at my side, Meredith squinted, probably shocked he wasn't in a robe and mask. I smirked. The Bonesmen liked theatrics, but that had been a bit much, even for them. "The Bonesmen welcome those of shadows and secrets," the man said. "Follow me." I'd been in this tomb a handful of times, though never by the path the Bonesmen led us through. We strode down a windowless hallway, smelling strongly of dust, going all the way to the end, where the man knocked on a door. "Enter." Our escort opened the door, and gestured for us to go in. When we did, Luca was already waiting for us in a vast study with a desk off to the side. He didn't always insert himself on missions, but this was Meredith's first true test as a dark artifacts hunter, and he was still angry at me for disappearing, so he'd insisted on being present. Normally, I would have despised being babysat, but in this environment it made sense. Luca was the Coven master of an influential organization, and if the Bonesmen respected anything, it was power. The mage sat across the table from an older gentleman, 2 empty chairs flanking him. On the other side of the room, a pool table stood, balls scattered over its surface as if our meeting was interrupting a rack. Bloody Bonesmen, always playing games. Their members were among society's most prestigious citizens. One would think they always had serious matters on their minds, but really, the men and women of the Brotherhood of Death dallied about quite a bit, or tempted trouble, which was likely why we were here. "Welcome." The elder rose and inclined his head. "I'm Gerard, an alumnus of the Brotherhood who will soon be helping the new members transition into Skull and Bones. As I'm already here, I've been asked to handle this matter as well. And who might I have the pleasure of speaking with today?"
"Meredith,"
the witch said. "Tobias, vampire."
"Oh, and I'm a witch,"
Meredith added, the apples of her cheeks coloring a delicious pink as blood flooded the area. I avoided inhaling, knowing that her scent would have grown stronger. "It's good to meet you," Gerard replied with a kind smile. "Please, sit." I gestured for Meredith to lead. She did, choosing the seat to the left of Luca. I took his right, settling into the leather and wood chair. Luca nodded at both of us, and when our gazes caught, I noticed he appeared to have regained his health a bit. There was no sheen of sweat on his face, though his skin still had not returned to its normal, warm olive glow. Odd. When I'd seen him earlier, he'd still appeared ill. Softly, I inhaled, and all became clear. A bouquet of herbs, pungent and medicinal, lingered around Luca. I suspected he'd ingested a potion to make him feel and look better. The leaders of the secret societies did not enjoy showing their weaknesses. While Luca was more powerful than all the humans in this society combined, he was no different in that respect. Not that I could blame him. The face he wore for the outside world determined how they treated us. As this was a business meeting, Luca would want shadows and secrets to retain as much authority as possible. Gerard lowered himself slowly into his seat, the wood creaking beneath his weight. Skull and Bones thanks you for entertaining this job. It's been quite an embarrassment for our tomb, and we're hopeful you'll retrieve our stolen item quickly." "We'll do our best," Luca replied. "As you know, Meredith is new to shadows and secrets, but skilled. You and I have already negotiated a fee based on her abilities, so now we discuss what is expected of my team. The item is magical in nature, no?" "It is, and it is relatively weak." He gulped. "But actually, this is a different item from the one we discussed." The man's voice took on a sheepish tone. "We've had another break-in, just last night, and this item takes precedence." "Oh?" Luca's eyebrows rose. "Will we have to renegotiate a fee?" Gerard asked. "I can do so." "Perhaps. Tell us about the newly stolen item. Who do you believe took it? Might it be a reciprocation of your notorious crookery, as you suggested the other item was?" Gerard's lips twitched. "We do enjoy claiming other societies' relics. Never yours, of course. But we're not sure who took this one. As I said, the item disappeared in the night, and the thief left not a trace." "Humans normally leave some trail behind," I mused. "Agreed. So, you believe the thief is supernatural?" Luca asked the older man. "That crossed our minds," Gerard admitted. "All the more reason to employ us. Still, we won't rule out other societies. We all have connections and means to perform the extraordinary, and they may be seeking revenge for items taken from this tomb." "Precisely." Gerard's eyes flickered uncomfortably to Meredith. "Though I do hope it's not another society. If word got out about what our item could do, it would embarrass the Brotherhood." "What can it do?" I asked. Meredith had been quiet so far, which came as somewhat of a shock. She wasn't shy, but then again, she might not know which questions to ask. Again, Gerard's attention darted to her, and she finally spoke up. "There's nothing you can say that will surprise me. I've seen some real shit, so tell it how it is." The man swallowed. "Better I show you. Come with me." He stood and walked to the far side of the room, past the pool table. We followed, and I wasn't the least bit surprised when he pressed the wall inward and a hidden door opened. I had to duck as we trailed Gerard through a low-ceilinged hallway, which, thankfully, was not long. Then we exited into a dark room that smelled even mustier than the corridors. The small space was lit only by candles sitting in wall sconces. Candlelight. How cliché of them. As if they couldn't afford proper lighting. "This is what I wanted to show you." Gerard ambled to an island and gestured down. When we reached the table, I blinked. "Gross," Meredith whispered, though she didn't back away. "Why the hell do you have that?" I, too, was surprised. We weren't looking at an island at all, but rather a glass-topped coffin of sorts, out in the open for the bonesmen to see. A skeleton stared back at us, nearly complete, save for the missing femur bone. "Who is it? And where's her leg?" I asked. "The leg bone is what we wish for you to find. It belonged to Madame de Pompadour, Louis XV's mistress." "And why is it here?" I asked. Astonished the rumors were true. It was said her skeleton protected founding papers and other documents, though I didn't think that bit was right. I saw no papers in this room. "She was moved here," Gerard said, "after the theft." "Not what I meant," I said, sensing he was dodging. "You told us the item was magical, but I don't see what's magical about a king's mistress's femur." Gerard cleared his throat. "Her bones are enchanted to increase the virility of our members." "I see," I said. It became crystal clear why this bone took precedent over their other stolen item. No bonesmen wanted that secret to get out. Least of all the oldest ones, who likely could no longer get it up. That would be quite embarrassing. Meredith will need to take another bone with her to find the missing piece, Luca said, his gaze still on the skeleton. A small portable one. But it will be returned, Gerard said, his tone a command. Of course, it will merely help her. She's new to understanding her magic, though she might be able to seek without another bone, if you want to take that risk. I want no risk, only for the femur to be returned quickly. Is that all you need? Luca and I turned to Meredith. Though I would hunt with her, protect her as she worked. Truly, this was her test. She swallowed, her eyes locked on the skeleton with a macabre interest. A finger bone should do. Gerard pressed a button on the side of the table. The glass lifted and he reached inside, plucking the longest bone of the right hand, a metacarpal, from where it rested. Reverently he handed it to Meredith, who looked like she might be ill at any moment. Thanks. She held the bone gingerly between two fingers. Can I? The witch gestured to her bag in a way that made me stifle a laugh. She was clearly disgusted, but trying to be polite. Of course, but do be careful with it. She nodded, and tucked the ivory rod away. If that's all, we should get going, Luca said. They'll start the search tonight. Skull and Bones appreciate your assistance. We left the hidden chamber, filing back into the study. Once Gerard sealed the doorway behind us, he strode to the exit of the room and opened the door. Please show our guests out. Apparently, someone had been waiting there the whole time. Well, they're going to have to keep waiting a moment longer. Luca and Meredith made to leave, but I hung back. The Coven Master noticed as they passed the desk. Tobias? If Gerard wouldn't mind, I'd like to have a private word with him. Luca's eyes widened, but he said nothing, a testament to how much he trusted me, even if I had been a pain in his arse of late. Very well. Gerard? He nodded. Of course. I'll have someone else show Tobias out. I'll be in touch about retrieving the original item later. Luca inclined his head, and the door shut behind him and Meredith. Once we were alone, Gerard turned to me. Is this about the job? The change in targets? No. One of your newest additions. Meredith might kill me for this, but that only mattered if she found out, which she wouldn't. Oh? Do tell. He's harassing our members, specifically my partner. I caught him doing so today, in broad daylight, and expect him to be reprimanded. Of course. I'll take care of it personally. Who was it? Bentley Sloane. Gerard's face grew stony, conflicted. Sloane was from a respected political family, but I didn't give a damn about that. Bentley was an elitist bastard who needed to be taught a lesson. I'd watched Meredith since she'd arrived at orientation, lurked in the shadows so she didn't know, and the moment Bentley had arrived, two things happened. She became angry, and for a moment, scared. Not that she'd admit it. Not that I'd expect her to. But I wouldn't have some tosser rich boy frightening members of my coven. But while I didn't care who Bentley's family was, Gerard did. I could see it in his eyes, in the stiff way he held himself when confronted with the idea of putting a person with influential ties in their place. We will inform him that such behavior is unbecoming to those in the Brotherhood, Gerard assured me, though there was a lack of conviction in his tone. A bit more pressure would need to be applied to ensure he did the right thing. Make sure you get him in line. My eyes pinned him in a way that would make most mortals tremble, though the old man did not. He did not avert his gaze, recognizing my dominance. If you don't, I'll make sure he understands, and you might not like my methods. Few mortals do. Slowly, I extended my fangs. The old man's face blanched. In this tomb, members of my coven acted as humans, But he knew what I really was, and he received my message loud and clear. Turning to exit, I told him, I'll show myself out.
Chapter 23. Meredith. The plan was to wait until nightfall to begin the search. Apparently, the Brotherhood of Death was notorious for crookery, the term they used for stealing from other societies. Or even Yale. Some people's kids. To Luca, it felt all too likely that someone from Scroll and Key, or Wolf's Head, or any of the other landed societies, had gotten into Skull and Bones' tomb and taken the femur. I found the practice absurd, but I didn't agree with the Coven master. People did weird things and purchased odd relics to gain the slightest semblance of power. To the Brotherhood of Death, power lay within the bones of a deceased king's mistress. These people weren't that different from the ringmaster's clients. Couldn't they have charmed anything else to have the same effects? I twirled the finger bone I'd taken between my own fingers as I stared at it. The thing was small, bird-like. Madame de Pompadour must have been tiny. Anything, Luca agreed from where he sat across from me. The lounging area in his office boasted straight-backed leather armchairs that were more comfortable than they appeared. Though one look at Tobias and you wouldn't know it. The vampire was as stiff as ever, lifting a glass of blood to his lips. He was on his third glass since we'd congregated in Luca's office an hour before. Did vampires really need this much blood for sustenance? One would think a pin or something innocuous would be better, I muttered, my eyes fixed once more on the bone. And more mobile than a whole freaking body. She was a mistress, Tobias interjected. Reportedly, an excellent one. It's the symbology of the thing, Stone. Bonesmen love symbology. Guess so. Seems impractical, though. Couldn't agree more, Luca said, and moved away from the seating area. His gait was slower now than at the Brotherhood of Death's tomb, almost shuffling. Once the Coven master reached the window, he pulled back a navy curtain. The sun was nearly gone, and the street lights illuminated his face, revealing a sheen of sweat on his brow. Whatever illness had come over him, his condition seemed to be touch and go. Darkness will be upon us soon, Luca said. Let's get you prepared. Prepared? I'd already changed into a different all-black outfit, and shoes suitable for running, should we need to resort to that. Just one more thing. Luca moved to his bookshelf and opened one of the drawers in the bottom half of the piece. Which would you like, Meredith? I rose to join him. As I got closer, a soft inhale filled my lungs. 12 or more daggers lined the drawer. Some blades were super elaborate, others simple. My gaze went to one somewhere in the middle of the lineup, to a sleek stiletto. A crescent moon sat on the pommel, an emerald the same shade of Tobias's eyes winked in the curve of the moon. Tobias's eyes? I wrinkled my nose as I caught myself. Correction. My birthstone. That one. I pointed to the dagger with the moon. Perfect for a witch, Luca said with a smile. I trust you know how to use it. Absolutely. What good Tomb Raider didn't know how to use a weapon? I could fire guns as well, and was a decent shot, but for my usual jobs, blades were more useful, quieter, easier to conceal, and more versatile. Perfect. Luca pulled open the drawer below the top one and grasped a belt and sheath. He handed them over, and I slid the sheath onto the belt. Once secure around my waist, I placed the dagger in the scabbard. Why do I need a vampire escort if I'm going to be armed? Or why do I need a blade if I have a vampire? The vampire who broke into Hans's home was a new blood, Tobias said, his gaze still on the glass of blood. He'd barely bothered to look at me since we'd arrived. It's unlikely he, or she, will be as strong as me, but they're fast. The admission sounded like it pained him. And we don't know if the vampire's working alone, he added. It could be a whole clan looking for you. In that case, though I can take down many, you should be armed to protect yourself. All right, then. My mouth dried up at the idea of multiple vampires hunting us.
I still believe the ringmaster had sent them, even if he'd sent Dens too. How large was my old boss's supernatural network? And how had I not known about it before? Now I know you insisted on a long jacket, I said, patting the blade at my side and trying to shrug off thoughts of the ringmaster. We've done this a time or two. Luca winked, but the gesture lacked energy. I'll be waiting for a report. Hopefully it won't take long, Tobias said, his voice further away than before. I twisted to find him waiting by the door. Man, vampires were freaky quiet when they moved. His gaze bore into me. Though he looked like he couldn't wait to get this over with, the depth of his attention still raised goosebumps on my arms. Let's go, Stone. Good luck, Luca said. Thanks. I pulled on the jacket I'd borrowed from Shay, tucking the finger bone in its pocket, and followed the vampire. Few people were in the hall, but those who were wished me luck. They all knew we were going on a mission, if not what it was. When we finally got outside, I exhaled. Most people in the Coven were nice, but I was still acclimating to being around so many faces daily. Then again, when the semester started, it would only get worse, so I'd better get used to it fast. Which way? Tobias grunted. He hadn't said a word to anyone else as we walked through the hall. He also hadn't looked at me, apparently preferring to walk ahead like he had a stick up his butt. I didn't know what the vampire's problem was, but as long as it didn't affect the mission, my moment to prove myself so I could move on to seeking the Pearl of Hell, I didn't really care. Aren't we supposed to swing by the other secret society's tombs? We are. You know where they are, right? I do, but testing your power is paramount. My lips parted in shock. You want me to use my magic to lead us there? You can't, can you? My nose scrunched up. No, I admitted. Everything I've found, I've always had a general location, or locations, to search in. The ringmaster sent me places, and the boundaries Luca gave us to find the grimoire weren't that wide. His eyebrows arched, but he said nothing about the competition. Speaking of, are you ever going to say you're sorry? I asked, and didn't miss when his eyes widened in surprise. For what happened during training? I already did. Sure, but what about how you acted like a dick when we were supposed to find the grimoire? I crossed my arms over my chest. We still stood outside the Coven Hall, and though I didn't really need this apology, something in me couldn't let it go, for reasons I couldn't understand, but usually blamed on me being a stubborn-ass Taurus. I had to dig my heels in. Maybe, as we set out for our job, I just wanted him to know I wouldn't be pushed over. A muscle feathered in the vampire's jaw. I will admit my actions during our test were unsportsmanlike and unprofessional. I apologize for that day. I cocked my head, waiting, and Tobias stared back at me, his emerald eyes blazing as if alit from within. I'd gotten my apology, but it didn't feel fulfilling. Something else was there, missing, something he wasn't saying. Tobias held back, and it clearly had to do with me. I desperately wanted to know why. We should be off, he said finally, charging past me. He marched down the street, tension lining his shoulders, and his steps heavier than usual. Coming, Stone? The bonesmen have already paid, and you need to prove your worth. I didn't respond, but dashed after him, not sure if I wanted to get to the bottom of the mystery of Tobias Aston or not. 2 hours later, frustration threatened to bubble out of me. So far, no magical pulse from the other landed societies had struck me. Not from Scroll and Key, not from Book and Snake, not from Wolf's Head. With each failure, Tobias's jaw clenched a little tighter. He might have apologized, but it was clear he didn't want to be near me anymore. Though the vampire infuriated me, I couldn't deny I felt chemistry there, was drawn to him as much as I wanted to push him away. I did my best to ignore the confusion back and forth. It didn't serve me, especially not when I needed to focus. Where's the next hall? I asked wearily. What would we do if it wasn't any of them? Where would we go from there? I wasn't sure, but the mission would probably take longer than Luca believed. Though he had not said as much, I got the sense he wanted this done tonight. "Manuscript is the next society on the list," he said, turning east. "Berzelius is one of the last tombs we haven't seen. If it's not there, we'll have to explore other options." "As in?" "The bone might no longer be in New Haven. A secret society may not be the culprit." "Which means it could be anywhere." I eyed Tobias sidelong when he said nothing in response, and suppressed the groan working its way up my throat. I couldn't take that sort of tension. If I had to take a plane with him to China or something, I'd probably stab myself in the eye. "Then let's pray to the gods and goddesses or whatever you magical people believe in, that it's at manuscript. Berzelius." I shook my head. What kind of silly names are those anyway? Again, he didn't reply, only turned left, leading me to the Society's hall. On the way, we passed an archaeology building and a vast green space that probably belonged to Yale, much like seemingly everything else around here, and then took another turn. When we found our way to Temple Street, something beneath my skin began to warm and itch. I sucked in a soft breath, which made Tobias turn. "Problem?" He studied me with an unnerving gaze. "No," I said, not wanting to divulge my thoughts yet. My magic wasn't totally new, but this level of sensitivity to it was. It didn't happen when I trained with Hans, and I suspected it was because while I used power then, I wasn't searching for things. Just learning how to do basic spells and protect myself. Stuff every capable witch should know, or so Hans claimed. Was this how my intuition, as I'd so often thought of it before, would have worked had it been totally free to flow through my veins? "This way, then." Tobias turned back around. I spotted the tomb before he pointed it out. Like the Skull and Bones headquarters, it was windowless. Berzelius was also white, and largely unadorned. It didn't fit in with the rest of the city, which I was quickly learning was something those who constructed tomb halls desired. "How warm and cozy," I said as we walked up to the entrance. "Berzelius is meant to house secrets." I was being sarcastic. "Heard of that in the 1,000 years you've been alive?" He looked like he wanted to correct me. Perhaps the number of years he'd been living was on the tip of his tongue, but somehow Tobias held off and nodded to the building. "What do you sense?" I closed my eyes, tuning in. The subtle heat under the surface of my skin was still there. Now tingles coupled the burn. My hand dipped into the pocket where I kept the finger bone. When my skin touched the remains of Madame de Pompadour, the tingling intensified. I was onto something, but for some reason I didn't feel like the pull was coming from the building in front of us. I let out a low hum before opening my eyes again and turning to the vampire. He watched me closely enough for me to jerk back a touch, but I corrected quickly. "I do sense something, but it might be around the back? I don't know. The directionality is off." "We'll circle it, as much as we can." Tobias scanned the area, which was not as busy as other parts of the city around campus. "If you feel differently as we explore, we will figure out how to get inside." Though I didn't know a thing about this hall, I'd wriggled into secure places before, and I was sure Tobias had too. If manuscript had taken the bone, we'd get it back. But the more we explored, the less sure I became we were in the right place. Once we neared the back of the tomb, the tingles vanished. Even when I touched the finger, nothing happened. "We're getting further away." I frowned, gaze raking over the white stone. It was stronger at the front. "I doubt they'd keep it by the door," Tobias said, and for the first time that night his tone was a little less chilly. But I still stiffened. "Do you doubt my abilities?" "It's not that," he replied. "Perhaps you should go back to the front. You can see if you still feel whatever you sense there." I nodded, slightly annoyed. It certainly sounded like he doubted me. This mission couldn't end soon enough. We walked around to the front of Berzelius, and again, the pricking sensation surged. My eyebrows knitted together, and following a hunch, I spun on my heel and stared across the street. A small, triangular park, just a place to rest one's feet, was located between two streets. Surely no one would leave an item belonging to a secret society out in the open. Not only was it magical, but Skull and Bones had money. If it wasn't another society that took it, but rather someone needing money, they wouldn't get it if something happened to the bone. "What else is around here?" I asked, scanning the surroundings. "In this direction." I pointed to the park. "What do you mean?" "Like buildings." "Let's see. There are shops, restaurants, a lab, a museum, the archaeology building. All sorts of things." I mulled that over. We'd passed the archaeology building on the way here. While it might be the perfect place to hide a bone, I hadn't felt a spike in my intuition, or anything else, that hinted I was on track. "The museum," I said, because it felt right. "Let's go that way." Tobias arched an eyebrow. "Why would someone place anything there?" I crossed my arms over my chest. "I don't know, Tobias. I'm not a criminal mastermind." "Are you sure?" My teeth ground together. If he knew why I worked for the ringmaster, he would feel so bad right now. Or most normal people would. A vampire with an iced-over heart probably wouldn't care. "Just show me the way," I gritted out. The vampire scowled and turned his back on me. Chapter 24. Meredith. We remained silent as we stalked down the street. Though I really wanted to give Tobias a piece of my mind, I was practiced in pushing down my emotions when it counted, and this was one of those times. I needed to find the femur bone of Madame de Pompadour to prove to Luca my power was developing, and that as soon as signs of someone using the pearl began to show, I should be sent to find the gem. But I'd never had to seek an item without already having a decent idea of where it was. A tomb, a rich dude's vault, a warlord's mansion, within a few blocks of Yale. I didn't have the vaguest idea where the femur bone was. Nothing other than the magic in my veins pushing me forward. And my annoyance with the vampire would only cloud my abilities. So down it went, into the recesses of my being. I released a heated exhale through my nostrils. Tobias turned slightly, eyeing me as if I were a bug on the bottom of his shoe. "Well, feel anything?" he prompted when it was clear I wasn't going to say a word. We were on the other side of Temple Street now, still across from the small park, but on another side of the triangle. With each step, the electrification of my nerve endings intensified. In my pocket, the token from Madame de Pompadour burned, so I wrapped my fingers around the bone. A jolt ran up my arm, shooting down my spine like lightning. From behind my breastbone, magic pulled me forward in a clear direction. "Yeah, that way." I pointed, marveling at the new intensity in my seeking powers. "What's that building?" Though the streetlights illuminated the area, we were still too far away for me to make out a sign, if there even was one. "The large one?" Tobias asked, following my gaze. I nodded. "That's the New Haven Museum." "I think the sensation is coming from there. Let's get closer." Our pace picked up, and as we neared the museum, a large, brick, colonial-style building with white trim, the feeling of someone hooking me by the ribs and pulling me grew. This was the place. If tomb raiding had felt like this before, I wouldn't have been able to deny my power. Even just the tingling had been a lot, but the hooking sensation was undeniable. "It's in there," I confirmed. Tobias's dark eyebrows knitted together. "Which makes little sense." "Why?" "This isn't like the Peabody or the Smithsonian. A bone would be out of place in this particular establishment. It focuses more on the history of New Haven and art, not archaeology. There would be no hiding it in plain sight, so it would have to be in an office, and that seems unlikely." "I'm sure it's in there," I insisted. "Maybe whoever took it is an employee with a vendetta against Skull and Bones. Have they ever stolen from this place?" Tobias shrugged. "It's possible. They do love their pranks. but getting on the wrong side of the Brotherhood of Death would be dim. It was funny how the bonesmen stole for shits and giggles, while I did so to afford a place to survive, and eventually, buy my freedom. Suddenly, I didn't feel quite as bad about being a Tomb Raider. "Do you think the lock is difficult to pick?" I left Tobias standing on the sidewalk as I climbed the few steps to the door. "Perhaps we should try around the back?" he replied, striding to keep pace. "Perhaps," I said, but didn't break my step. I wanted to check out the easiest option first. "Hide behind the columns if you're worried. I'll be quick." Tobias grunted, but as I neared the door, he did as I requested. The warming and strangely pleasant stinging of my skin was so strong it made me want to scratch an itch, but I refrained, and hoped that once I found what I was looking for, it would go away. Before my magic was unbound, I'd always had some vague sense of intuition leading me. This was much stronger, a sensation I couldn't ignore no matter how hard I tried. One glance at the lock confirmed I could probably pick it. I was no novice in this area. However, I also spotted cameras, and if there were cameras, the door was likely alarmed. But that didn't mean all the entrances were. "This is a last resort." I turned back to the vampire, whose shoulders were so stiff they resembled stone. "You don't say," he snapped. "Who would have thought busting through a front door in plain view of humans would be a last resort?" "Oh, shut up." I gazed upward, doing my best to ignore the smugness rolling off of him. "How do you feel about scaling the building? Did they teach you that in vamp school?" The idea of a vampire school struck me as ludicrous and almost made me laugh, until I realized it was no crazier than the coven I'd pledged myself to. Just when I thought I was slipping easily into this world, something like that would make it clear I hadn't accepted it as deeply as I believed. "Not in school," Tobias muttered, his eyes trailing upward. "But you're probably correct that a window is our best bet. I doubt they're all alarmed. Certainly not the ones at the top." "And you can get in?" Given enough time, I probably could figure out a way in myself. But if Tobias could use his super vampy strength and stealth for this, and let me in a more mundane way, then all the better. "I always find a way. Follow me." Before I could respond, he was off, stalking toward the side of the museum where the streetlights could not reach. We rounded the corner and strode toward the back of the building, finding ourselves in a small parking lot. Without the streetlights, it was even darker back here. Darker and secluded. If we could break in through one of the windows, no one would see us. "There," Tobias said, pointing upward. "The circle is our best bet." I squinted, and my mouth fell open. He was pointing to a window meant purely for decoration, one that had been placed 3 stories high and was smaller than the rest. Could he even fit through that hole? "Okay, sure, but you're going to have to get up there. Not to mention, I don't think you'll fit." "You'd be surprised what places I've gotten myself into," Tobias replied, not at all worried. "We'll have to break the glass, but it's our best bet." I stopped and cast a glance around, as if searching for an answer to my unasked question. How did the person who took the bone get in? "I suspect they came in during business hours. The museum isn't busy all the time." How in the world someone just waltzed in and hit a leg bone was beyond me, but weirder things had happened. Like this. Or my talking cat. Or basically anything from the last week. "You're amenable?" Tobias pressed, turning to me. He didn't look pissed off, more like excited. A tiny bit of the ice I harbored inside regarding him melted. "Yeah, but how am I going to get up there?" He turned around, showing me his back. "Climb on." "You've got to be joking," I replied, glowering at his back. "If any windows in this building are not censored, it's that one. If I get you in any other way, an alarm will sound. The Coven can get its members out of jams, but it's really best to draw as little attention as possible." My throat tightened as I broke my stare off with the back of his head and allowed my gaze to drift up. Although I was in shape, there was no way in hell I'd be able to scale this wall. Meredith, we're wasting time. Are you sure the bone is in there? I was, damn it. And I was also sure this was the best way to get inside. Certainly the most undetectable. Fine. But let it be known I do not like being treated like a child. I muttered. Noted. Tobias bent at his knees, making it easier for me to wrap my arms around his neck. Then I jumped up, and the moment my legs circled his hips, a jolt of electricity shot through me. I drew in a soft breath, and beneath me, Tobias stiffened. Did he feel that too? Are you all right? He asked after a moment, his tone a touch raspy. I swallowed. Yeah, you shocked me. Sure, that was what it was. Apologies. Secure yourself. How's this? I tightened my grip around his shoulders and waist. Too hard? You can't hurt me. The way he said it made me think he wasn't so sure about that. Ready? I am. The moment the words left my mouth, Tobias was at the wall, scaling it like a damn squirrel climbing a tree. My breath hitched, but I forced down any sounds of fear, not about to allow Tobias to hear them. Within a minute, he'd made it to the top. As the vampire shimmied right, I hung on ever tighter. Tobias reached the window and made a fist with one hand, leaving him, and me, attached to the wall by one hand. With a single blow, he shattered not only the glass, but the wood that held the smaller panes together in a loose lattice. Blood dripped down his arm as he ripped the wood out and continued breaking glass until only the tiniest bits remained on the circumference of the circular window. That's the best I can do. Be careful of your hands and shins as you go in. I gaped. I totally hadn't thought this through. Of course I'd have to go inside first. We couldn't fit through together, and there was no way I'd be able to cling to the side of this building without him. But what if there was a 30-foot drop on the other side? The memory of Den slacking his grip on the rope and the shaft came back to me. I'd only fallen a couple of feet, and that had been terrifying. My stomach pitted. I don't know if I can. It's the only way, Meredith. If you can't get down, hang from the windowsill and hold on. I'll assist once inside. He said it with such self-assurance, it almost erased my doubt. Almost. Do you know what the other side looks like? I pressed. I don't. We have to trust we can figure it out. Not delivering on this mission is not an option. No, it wasn't. And the faster I succeeded in a real mission, the faster I'd gain Luca's trust and get to search for the Pearl of Hell and right my wrongs. Crap. Okay, fine. Can you scoot below the hole and I'll climb over you? Tobias positioned himself as requested without so much as a peep. No dry, witty remarks. He must have sensed my hesitation. Okay. I'm going to have to step on your shoulders. Do what you must. I can handle it. I swallowed thickly as doubt clawed at my heart. Are you sure we're going to be able to get down on the other side? I will see to it. Ugh. Again with the confidence. It left me with no way to deliberate without sounding weak, so I took a deep breath and prepared to climb. My hand trembled as it left the safety of Tobias's body to reach for the window. I latched onto the wood, avoiding the broken glass, and then pulled up. Only when I was sure I was up as far as I could go did I unravel my leg. Quickly, I kicked and scurried my way upward, feeling the influence of gravity, but fighting against it. Tobias helped, one hand pushing at my foot. My heart raced, and the next thing I knew, I plunged through the window, eyes wide and hands flailing. Somehow, I managed to keep my lips clamped tightly shut as I fell, and when I hit wood a moment later, I gasped. Thank God! I wheezed, tempted to kiss the ground that had saved me from an imaginary freefall. I rolled over and looked around. We had entered into an office. Considering the piles of papers and cheap-looking furniture, it might belong to an intern. Watch out! Tobias called from above. A second later, he hopped through the window with far more grace than I had. He didn't miss a beat, approaching me with a hand extended to help me up. I almost accepted his assistance, but drew back. My palms were bloody. I hadn't even noticed the glass shards cutting me. "We have to bind them," Tobias said, his pitch elevated. Something in his tone made me lift my gaze. His pupils were enormous, wild. I'd seen that expression before. The day we'd trained. The day he'd grazed my neck with his fangs. "Are you okay?" I whispered, more scared for myself than him as I got to my feet. "Fine. I ate at headquarters. It's just—" He trailed off, as if fighting a force deep inside himself. "Here." He stomped over to an open box and pulled out a New Haven Museum t-shirt from its depths. The next second, the shirt was torn to shreds, and the white cotton wrapped around my hands. "Thanks," I murmured, noticing how the vampire's pupils shrank the moment my wounds were covered. The blood he'd drunk in Luca's office hadn't affected him at all. Why did mine? Did my magic have something to do with it? "Tune into your power," he replied curtly, his eyes on anywhere but me. "Do you still sense the bone?" Though fear and apprehension zinged through me, it was easy to sense my power seeking the item. "It's here. Close." "Good. Let's find it." Tobias moved to the door, showing himself out. I followed, careful to keep my distance. He'd helped me get inside, allowed me to use him as a human ladder, and bound my cuts. He said he'd fed, and he'd held himself together, though my blood clearly affected him. All of those actions screamed I could trust him. And yet, from the stiff way he walked, I wasn't sure I could trust Tobias not to lash out at me, to threaten me, to sink his fangs into my neck and drink. No, I couldn't trust the vampire. Not while I still had blood in my veins. Chapter 25. Tobias. The scent of Meredith's blood never stopped flooding my nostrils, teasing my senses. We stopped only when we spotted the first blinking red light of a camera in a main hallway. "What are we going to do? I didn't come prepared." She gestured to herself, which I took to mean that she normally wore disguises when infiltrating places guarded with such technology. "The tug of magic is coming from downstairs, so we need to get past that." "Hold on," I answered. "Stay around this corner." Vampiric speed made me unidentifiable on film, and my kind could jump quite high. As such, reaching the camera was not an issue, and neither was smashing it to bits. After the first camera was taken care of, I darted down 2 more corridors, searching for more flashing red lights. Surprisingly, there were fewer than would have been prudent. Then again, this isn't the Louvre. I smashed each recording device, ending with the one at the top of the stairs, confident that would be the last one until we descended to the first floor. "What was that about?" Meredith asked when I returned. "The cameras are no longer an issue," I replied, trying to ignore the scent of her blood on her skin and wishing I could distance myself. "There will likely be more downstairs, but probably not too many. I suspect the museum is in need of funding." She arched an eyebrow but left her hiding spot. When we passed by the first site of destruction, her eyes widened. But she said nothing and led me down a stairwell. At the bottom, I dispatched 1 more camera. "This way," Meredith murmured, eyes wandering the area. We crept past the often photographed rotunda and into a photography exhibit. "I think it's in here." "Hold on." I peeked inside, found 1 camera near the entrance, and took care of it. "Sucks that they don't have funding and we're destroying their shit," Meredith said when I returned. "The Coven will make a sizable donation next week. If the femur is here, so will Skull and Bones. It was all part of our contract with our clients." She snorted delicately. "Of course they will. If you're done worrying about trivial matters," I gestured into the room, "lead the way." She stepped past me, once again overwhelming me with her aroma. Because the wound was covered, I was in control, but barely. If I hadn't taken precautions and drank so much blood while we'd waited at headquarters, I might not be so well off. There was no way to tell. A shiver racked my spine. I'd not been this tempted by a person since the week after my transformation from sailor in the Royal Navy to the newest vampire of the Laurent clan.
"It's super close,"
Meredith whispered, gliding through the gallery with steps almost as light as my own.
"I can feel it. It's like a thudding in my chest."
Suddenly, she stopped. Her slender-fingered hand dipped into her pocket, cobalt nails disappearing as her two-toned eyes shuttered closed for a moment. Moonlight poured into the room from a small window above, bathing her in a silver glow. The rest of the room faded. In this light, using her magic, she'd never looked more like a witch, or smelled like one. If there was one scent more powerful than that of her blood, it was her magic. Sweet honey spiking the fresh forest and jasmine aroma that normally clung to her skin. I inhaled, tempting bloodlust, and dragging the pleasing scent deeper into my being. Then I froze. Something else punctuated the air, something not of Meredith, nor of me. Iron and dry cotton, scents typical of one supernatural order. There was another vampire in the New Haven Museum, or there had been recently. "Meredith, don't move," I commanded. She stiffened, and then whirled about, eyes wide open and blazing. "What?" "Don't move. You know you're not my boss, right?" She crossed her arms over her chest, lips twisting in displeasure. The instinct to dominate her, to make her do as I wished, rushed over me, and I glared at her, willing her to listen. But before I could compel her, I blinked. I didn't do that with Coven members. We were a team, colleagues. In fact, I rarely compelled at all anymore. But again, Meredith made things difficult, and my body responded in ways that it did not when others challenged me. Why? The simple answer was that few people ever challenged me. Giselle, Luca, and Hans did. Gunnar too, but in his teasing way. All were leaders of their magical orders. Shay sometimes tossed me a bit of sass, though it was hard to take the Nephilim seriously. She was strong for her age, but not compared to a vampire like me. If I ever saw Raphael and Serena, they too would challenge me, as was their right. In the blood of Laurent, we were equals, all Giselle's children, first of her blood. But it had been so long since I'd spoken to either of my closest siblings, let alone seen them. Meredith stepped closer, the motion ripping me back to the moment, and my gaze barreled into her, again, the power within me seeking to control her.
"What did you just do?"
she hissed, glowering at me. Again, I cut off the instinct to dominate, and blinked, feeling completely disoriented. "Excuse me?"
"I felt weird. Did you use magic on me? Do vampires have magic?"
Vampires? Bloody hell. I still hadn't told her what I scented. Meredith. I took care to keep my tone low, so the other vampire, should they still be present, would not hear. We might not be alone.
"What? Is there a guard?"
"A vampire?" Her spine straightened, and she closed the distance between us.
"The one who broke into Hans's house?"
I can't be certain. I did not smell that blood. But even if I did, it would smell different than the person would. A slow exhale parted her lips.
"Is it close? I still think the ringmaster might have hired the vampire that broke into Hans's place. Could be the same."
"Not close," I replied, tucking the other information she gave away for later. The vampire had probably come through here, but it was no longer in the room. If they were, their scent would be stronger, and if they moved even an inch or breathed too deeply, I'd hear them. Plus, if they were a new blood, as Luca believed, they would not be able to keep themselves from Meredith for long. She smelled far too tempting.
"Then we should hurry and get the hell out of here," she said. "The bone is close. I can feel it."
"I'll keep watch. Find it." I trailed Meredith through the exhibit, which suddenly appeared larger than before. All the while, my gaze darted from side to side. The other vampire's scent lingered, but did not grow stronger. Wherever the creature was, it wasn't in this room. The witch led me to the far back wall and huffed. I feel like the femur is back here, but everywhere. Like whoever took it rubbed it on the walls or something. Her nose wrinkled. What if they did that and left? 'Cause where would you even hide a bone in here? It's all photos. She was right. It wasn't like one could hide a femur behind these canvases. Could the bone's magic really be so strong as to leave a trace? I usually disregarded other societies' magics as weak, but did skull and bones truly have a relic of note? I doubted it. Surely nothing like the Pearl of Hell, which would have emitted a powerful resonance for Meredith to follow. The witch had been able to sense it even without the full extent of her magic. Whoever took the femur likely knew about magic, which meant that though the thief might have been trying to throw supernaturals off, the item we sought was most likely still present. Grab a hold of the finger again, I urged her. Try to narrow your focus to only that. She didn't argue, or even glare at me for telling her what to do, which hinted she might feel a bit lost, or perhaps even scared. After all, a vampire had threatened her and might still be in the area. I have your back, I whispered. She pulled the token of a long-dead king's mistress from her pocket. Softly, the air around her pulsed in a way I was sure she didn't sense. And then a soft gasp parted her lips. Left! She turned around another partition. There! She gestured with her hand, the finger bone in its grip. I followed her direction. In a storage closet? Seems a bit simple. Maybe it was temporary, she shrugged, striding over and grabbing the handle. It didn't budge. She grunted. Locked. Obviously, I didn't have a key, but that didn't matter. I joined her at the door and wrapped my hand around the knob. Step to the side. Sometimes wood splinters. Meredith complied, and as soon as she was out of the way, I ripped the door open. A crack sounded, making me cringe. If the other vampire was still present, I'd given away our location. There, the witch murmured. I gazed into the closet, filled with cleaning materials, and shook my head. There, lying on a shelf as if it were nothing more than a bottle of cleaner, was the ivory femur bone of Madame Pompadour. My partner darted into the closet, seizing the bone. Got it! Let's move before... Somewhere, deep in the museum, glass shattered. I ripped Meredith out of the closet so she could not be trapped inside should an adversary appear, and whirled around to take in the exhibit. The other vampire was, indeed, still in the building, though not in this room. Not that such little distance made a difference. They had announced themselves, which meant they were now hunting us. Meredith, we must leave quickly. Get on my back. She balked. I can run! Not fast enough. Not if she wanted to avoid the new blood I suspected was stalking her. Mindful of the femur bone we were risking our skin for, I grabbed the witch and flung her onto my back. Oof! She breathed, but snaked one arm around my shoulders. Again, the scent of her blood flooded my nostrils, and somehow, perhaps because I knew danger was lurking, I shoved down my desire to control her, finding it a little easier than it had been before. I twisted slightly, and a flash of white told me she clenched the bone in the other hand. Keep a tight hold. I won't let up until we're far from the museum. As soon as the words were out of my mouth, I raced out of the exhibit room, scanning the space as I went. Should I risk it and use the front door? We had not dealt with the cameras in that part of the museum, and destroying them would slow us down even more. But if we didn't, humans might see us leaving. Then again, they might anyway. I couldn't run as fast as usual with Meredith on my back. Certainly not at the speed that would help me avoid being detected by the cameras. A witch could not handle vampiric speed. Another thought struck like a match being lit. The other vampire hadn't seemed at all concerned by the cameras. Why? Was their sire that idiotic? Or that influential?
Did the vampire who'd sent their child know they would be able to deal with the new blood being seen and their image potentially thrown up on news sites? Vampires didn't answer to humans, but we did have a governing body. The Covenant, a group of supernaturals who liked to keep it quiet that magical beings existed. But if the vampire in the museum didn't disable the cameras, that revealed a lack of regard for those in charge. Who were we dealing with here? We were nearly to the rotunda, where I'd have to make a choice to exit the way we'd arrived or use the door, when the air shifted. Around my shoulders, Meredith's arm tightened and her breath thinned. I'd slowed ever so slightly, preparing for an attack to come from one of the closest exhibit rooms, when suddenly I caught a flash in the air above. Before I could deduce what it was, Meredith was torn from my back and flung down to the ground just as a powerful hand shoved me forward to the floor, sending me into an uncontrollable roll. I swore as I slammed into the wall with such force a painting hanging above dislodged to land on top of me. The new blood bastard had jumped from the second floor. "Dens!" Meredith screamed, sending my usually static heart into overdrive. I leapt to my feet, whirling to face the witch. She dropped the bone and instead held the dagger Luca had given her. Though sharp, it wasn't enough to decapitate a vampire, but judging by the ferocity on her face, she was undeterred. "What happened to you, Dens?" Meredith demanded, swiping the dagger at the man in a tight black t-shirt and sunglasses. "Who did this?" The vampire hissed, a bad sign. He was on the verge of losing control. I launched myself at him, but being a new blood, he was fast and danced out of my grip, spinning in a wide circle away from the witch. "Meredith, get back!" I commanded. She didn't listen, but came up next to me, her gaze trained on her former partner. "He's a vampire? But how? Is the ringmaster one?" It seems whoever sprung him from prison had connections. I darted forward as Dens attempted to veer toward Meredith, fangs extended. My fist collided with his face, and his neck snapped to the side. Had he been human, the blow would have been deadly. But Dens was no longer human, no longer mortal. Without a stake or fire, the only way to kill him would be to rip his head off. "Dens, we can help! You don't have to follow the ringmaster anymore!" Meredith's cries were still echoing the space as the new blood launched himself at me, his eyes so black I could feel the thirst burning in his throat. "She's right," I said, my tone even, in control. I needed this new blood to sense my dominance. I took a step forward, and Dens reacted to the motion, going backward. Good. He likely felt my power, and I was effectively creating a space between him and the witch. Now, I needed him to make eye contact with me so I could compel him to stop this nonsense and tell me the identity of his sire. "The Coven can hide you, teach you," I continued. "The ringmaster won't find you! We're searching for him, going to stop him!" Meredith yelled, drawing attention to herself in a way that made the skin on my nape tighten. "Death to the ringmaster!" Dens spat, his attention snapping to her despite the danger I posed to him. "And screw your coven! You left me to rot!" I'm sorry!" Meredith shouted, the remorse clear in her voice. "I didn't want to! Dens darted toward me, and I sidestepped a punch to the gut. "I made her leave you," I said, shoving him backward a few feet. "But it was a mistake. Let me right it. I can teach—" "I don't need your teachings!" Dens cut me off. "My sire is all-powerful. He'll teach me. As soon as I bring him her." Fast as lightning, he surged around me, and before I could spin to follow, the new blood had Meredith by the neck. She kicked her legs as he lifted her, so only her toes brushed the ground. Strangled noises came from her throat as his grip tightened. "I'm not supposed to, but I can't help it," Dens murmured, his tone entranced. "I just can't." A look of enchantment flashed across his face before his fangs sank into Meredith's neck. "No!" I flew across the room. Though her open veins posed danger to my composure, I couldn't stop myself from grabbing the vampire's skull and ripping it upward. His eyes blazed into mine, blood dripping down his face. Meredith's blood. My throat constricted. The thirst that so often accompanied her presence, the yearning to dominate and taste her, rammed into me like a 2,000-pound bull. I staggered backward, but recovered almost as quickly. I had to remain in control, had to save her. If I didn't, this new blood would drain the life from her in minutes. From the rough gasping of her breath, he'd already taken too much, too quickly. The revelation somehow centered me, erasing my need to drink, and just in time. In the instant my thirst had overcome me, Dens had fixated once again on Meredith. Her skin looked pale, clammy, and her hand trembled as she tried to swat him away. I shot my own hand out, grabbing Dens by the chin, forced his gaze to lock with mine. Then I lashed out with my power of compulsion. "Release her." He blinked, as if in acceptance of the command, and relief flooded me. But it lasted for only a second before the vampire sank his fangs deeper into Meredith's neck. All the air seemed to get sucked from the room. My compulsion hadn't worked. Why? I grabbed his head and pried it from the witch's throat. Once his fangs were clear of her body, I ploughed my fist into his stomach like a battering ram. Blood sprayed from his mouth, sending my own thirst into overdrive, but the blow had done what I intended. Under the force of my attack, Dens released Meredith. She fell to the floor like a rag doll, and though my instincts warred to check on her, or to drink from her, I fought them both down, instead lifting Dens over my head and throwing him across the room. He crashed into the stairs, but rose immediately, chest heaving. "Who's your sire?" I roared. The new blood stared right at me, unworried about my powers of compulsion, because they didn't work on him. They should, but they didn't. That alone told me that his sire was powerful, a royal vampire, someone in the web of vampires who could claim the blood of Laurent, my family. "Who is it?" I hissed. "Tell me, or I'll tear your head off right now." A bark of laughter exploded from Dens, and he wiped the streak of blood from his face. "Perhaps one day you'll learn, but not today." He spun and sprinted up the stairs, moving so fast that his visage blurred. I dashed to follow, but the moment glass shattered above, it was no use. He was gone. He had burst through one of the windows above and disappeared into the night. "Fuck!" My hands flew up to grip the sides of my head. This was beyond comprehension. "Tobias!" Meredith's voice rasped from where she had fallen. "Help!" My breath hitched as another dilemma presented itself. The witch was weak, possibly in need of blood. But could I trust myself to get close to her? To not drink? "Tobias!" My heart thudded hard inside my chest. Slowly, I turned. Pools of red were spreading beneath Meredith, calling to me, enhancing the burn in my throat. But another instinct was rising too, responding to the faint beating of her heart. Too slow. Too weak. Dens took too much from her. Meredith is dying. That thought firmly lodged in my head and heart. I closed the distance between us. The witch lay splayed out. Staring down at her, I knelt, lifted her into my arms, and examined the wound Dens had left. It was gaping. Pink-stained skin, flayed open, life-threatening. The new blood had taken no care at all when he'd bitten her. My throat constricted as the way to save her, or to buy her time, presented itself. Vampire blood had healing properties. It wouldn't replenish her own blood, but it could put Meredith in a state of stasis, close the wound, and minimize scarring. But sharing my blood would also mean bonding us to some degree, and after what Giselle said, what if my maker was right, and we were fated? Soulmates. I couldn't be that for a mortal woman, couldn't do that to them. But I couldn't let this one die either. A soft, gurgling noise bubbled up the witch's throat, banishing my indecision. I'd give her enough to get her to the Coven's tomb so the healers could finish the job. I couldn't risk more than that. Gently, I shifted Meredith to one arm and brought my opposite wrist to my mouth. Tearing into my flesh was easy. The tang of blood was still on my own lips when I brought my wrist to hers. "Drink," I said loudly. At any moment she might slip away, and I worried she couldn't hear me. "Meredith, you must drink!" Slowly, her lips parted. I pressed my skin to those deep pink lips, exhaling when they closed around the punctures my fangs had created. A soft sigh left her, and heat exploded through me, making me tingle, an indication she'd taken a sip. To mortals, vampire blood tasted like the nectar of the gods. It was yet another way we seduced them into trusting us. "Just a little," I warned as she sucked the life force from my veins. "Enough for you to survive the transport to S&S. Another pull, another explosion of heat. My toes curled, and the desire to pry her lips from my wrist and kiss her came over me. What the bloody hell? No! Meredith took another pull, and finally, a little colour returned to her cheeks. No more. It had to be enough. Any more blood, and we risked forming a bond I didn't want. One she should never be forced to form. "That's enough." I pulled my wrist away, and a pitiful sucking sound filled the silence as her eyes, wild and full of need, latched on to me. "More!" she demanded. Some strength had returned to her voice, and though I doubted she could walk on her own, I decided to take that as a sign she was ready. I gathered up the witch in my arms, and, damning the consequences, ran out the front door of the museum and sprinted for headquarters.
Chapter 26. Meredith.
"You shouldn't have moved her so soon."
A voice whispered into my consciousness.
"It was that or let her die."
Another voice, one that warmed my insides, growled defiantly.
"You could have given her more blood. It would have helped. She wouldn't have been so jostled in transport." A long pause passed. "I did the best I could." "I don't know what you did, but it wasn't that." I shifted and moaned. My throat hurt so bad, like someone had rubbed it with sandpaper, and no sound came out. What had happened? Slowly, I opened my eyes and blinked heavily. I was lying on a bed, in a room I'd never seen before. Plants hung from the ceiling, vines trailing to the floor. The walls were white, and the space airy, clean, earthy with a spot of green. A skylight was positioned above me, letting in a beam of sunlight. Where the hell was I? No one was around, so where were the voices coming from? Painfully, I pushed myself up and scanned the area. I lay in some sort of hospital room, one with 2 beds, and I sucked in a breath, catching sight of the bagged blood hanging at my side, the needle in my arm. Blood. Dens. My throat constricted, and a strange, high-pitched, horrible sound flew out of my lips. I hadn't even known I was capable of sounding so scared. "Meredith, are you okay?" One voice I'd heard came closer, and my gaze landed on Luca and Tobias rushing my way. My breath came faster as the memories of the New Haven Museum rushed back. Dens was there. He'd been a vampire. But had he really? Yes, surely he had. He'd looked different. The Dens I'd known had a beer gut, but the person I'd seen in the museum had not, hinting at a dramatic change. My old partner had attacked me. But Tobias... what had he done? I watched Tobias approach with hesitation in his eyes, but something else was there too. Not dismissal or annoyance, like when he usually looked at me. Heat. That made no sense. "Meredith," Luca cooed, as if I were a child from where he stood at my bedside. "You might not be able to talk, and that's okay. Your windpipe was damaged. Not if you're all right. Do you need a painkiller?" I opened my mouth, determined to speak, to get answers. I swallowed, pushing past the pain clawing up my throat. Fine. Where am I? The headquarters infirmary. I blinked. I'd been to the healing area once, to ease my hangover from hell. The space didn't look the same. You're in a secluded section, a private room, Luca explained, seeming to read the confusion on my face. He looked terrible. There were dark smudges beneath his eyes, and his usually warm olive skin had taken on a gray pallor. He hadn't looked so bad last time I saw him. Only people who are not well off are permitted back here, he admitted quietly. Tobias and I were checking up on you. What happened? Again, the image of Dens flashed in my mind, his fangs glinting. You and Tobias were on your mission for Skull and Bones when you were attacked by a new blood vampire. He paused. Dens, I murmured. Really, though? Luca exhaled. Yes, really. We weren't sure what you'd remember. You lost a lot of blood. I remembered the sharp spikes of fear and the sensation of fangs piercing my neck, but not much beyond that. Still, it was enough to put two and two together. Dens had bitten me, drank my blood. How did I survive? Tobias gave you blood to drink. What? Ew! Vampire blood has healing capabilities. For the first time, Tobias spoke. It's not a panacea, but it will keep you alive, even if you're an inch from death. The way he said it made me think that was exactly where I'd been, and that he hadn't liked it at all. Pfft, as if he'd care. So, why do I still feel like hell? I asked, twisting my neck to face Luca and cringing at the loud crack of my bones. I couldn't give you much, Tobias said stiffly, and I turned back in time to see him look away. He was lying. You could have given her more, though, Luca muttered. She's alive. She's here. Isn't that what matters? I wanted to press that sure, I was alive, but I felt like butt. Somehow, I stopped myself. If one thing was obvious, it was that Tobias had saved my life. The vampire who'd threatened me before had now saved me. More than that, though he seemed upset with Luca, toward me he was worried. I had no idea why, but I wasn't going to look a gift horse in the mouth. Thank you, I whispered. Thank you for saving me. I wish I could have done more, he replied, his green eyes straying to Luca pointedly. Did Dens die? I asked, wanting to change the subject. The air crackled with intensity. There was definitely a subtext here I didn't understand. He escaped, Tobias replied, sounding miffed about it. Tobias couldn't compel him. Otherwise that would not have happened. Compelling means control, right? I needed to be sure. Tobias nodded. So, all those vampire shows I'd spent hours binge-watching had not been for nothing. Are you good at that? Good? Like, better than Dens would be? Tobias's eyebrows rose, but understanding fluttered across his features a second later. Not all vampires can compel. Only those who remain very close to our origins. Apparently Dens is now among that group. Can he compel you? No. Actually, had I been better prepared, I think I might have been able to do it to him after all. Tobias looked flustered. Then why didn't you? I asked, unable to hide the exasperation in my tone. He surprised me. That element of surprise allowed him to get past me, to you. After that, only your life mattered. His tone dipped at the end, softened, weakening my resolve to keep prying. I'd been shocked to see Dens, too. Shocked and guilty. I'd left my partner in an Egyptian prison, and look what he'd become. Had I pressed to get him out and succeeded, this never would have happened. Thank you, I whispered again, as a wave of exhaustion came over me. As if he could sense how tired I was, Tobias took a step back. I should let you rest, and I still need to return the femur to Skull and Bones. Come back here when you're done, Luca said. Of course. Tobias turned and walked toward the door. With each step he took, a strange urge to call him back overtook me. I wanted to touch him. I shook my head. What was that about? I'd almost died, and now I was going all soft? The moment we were alone, Luca poured a glass of water and handed it to me. You did well. Doesn't seem like it. Injuries are not uncommon on missions. Why do you think we have this wing? Spa days? He let out a soft chuckle. It is soothing in its own way. But seriously, Meredith, you can't judge the outcome based on the number of bruises received in the process. Or fang marks on my neck. My fingers strayed upward, only to find gauze. Those will heal, Luca assured me. Tobias's blood will ensure it. I took a sip of water. How long was I out? It's midday, the day after your mission. Not too long. I exhaled. I hadn't been laid up in this bed for a week. Like I said, we're proud of you. Tobias reports you found the femur quickly and stood your ground when you saw dens. That couldn't have been easy. I feel guilty. My teeth dug into my bottom lip. Can we help him? Perhaps. A lot depends on who his sire is. In vampire society, the person who made you holds great power over you, as much as the governing supernatural body in this world, the Covenant. That sucks. The Coven Master's lips twitched. It does. But we will try to find him, to learn what happened and see if we can help. He was dragged into this, as you were. He got the short end of the stick. Indeed. We stayed silent for a few seconds before the Coven Master sighed and took a step back, away from the bed. I'll send a healer in to check on you, but I'm sure what you need the most is rest. That was a bit rich coming from him. The dark bags under Luca's eyes hung heavily. I could sleep. You should too, I said, trying not to overstep, and failing. To his credit, Luca only gave me a soft smile. Soon. Term begins in a few days and you'll need to be in class. I must ensure your enrollment is in order, and I still have course papers to go over. I blinked. Course papers? For my class. You teach? I didn't know. I'm an adjunct professor. He shrugged. It's very part-time, but the more the Coven can integrate into campus life, the better. People ask fewer questions. Now, as I said, you should rest. He turned and went to the door, throwing me one last glance as he opened it. Sleep well, Meredith. You deserve it. Chapter 27. Meredith. You seem tense. Are you sure this is a good idea? Benedict asked from where he perched on his luxury cat bed. He sounded nervous for me to leave, which wasn't as surprising as it would have been a week ago. Since I'd returned from the infirmary, the cat had been very concerned about my health and safety. Yeah, I replied. I'll be fine. Don't sound too convincing. My lips tightened. The cat was right. He was anxious that dens might be coming back, and while that fear lingered within me too, I couldn't dwell on it. I had other things to worry about today. In no way was I certain that attending Yale was a good idea. The concept of me fitting into the Ivy Leagues was too alien. Would I hate it? Would the other students hate me? Did the second one matter? Would I survive the classes? The pressure? Meredith, Benedict prompted. I don't know, I said simply, but Luca wants me to go to classes. Not everyone in the Coven is integrated with Yale, but as many people as possible are. It's a good cover for S&S, and personally, something I can't say no to. Because honestly, who passed up an all-expense-paid education from Yale? Hell, I'd barely earned my GED online, so Luca sneaking me in here was a miracle in itself. I had to take advantage of this opportunity. It was one of the best I'd ever been given. I hefted my book-filled backpack, a gift from Shay, over my shoulders. My neck only twinged a little, telling the injury I'd sustained really was mostly healed. From the outside, it appeared as though nothing had happened. Thanks to Tobias's blood, my skin was smooth, unblemished, and even. Having a neck scar would have sucked, and only set me further apart from the students of Yale. Very well. See you tonight. Harper's making salmon for dinner, so don't be late. Best of luck. Benedict circled in his bed and lay back down, prepared to snooze for a few more hours. As both had insanely early classes, my roommates were already gone, so I locked up the house and began the short walk to campus. On the way, my nerves jumped and danced. No one in the Coven had spotted Den since my attack. But would he have left New Haven? Tobias had told Luca that my partner wanted me, and not just as a snack. He'd been sent to take me alive. Probably for my seeker skills. My blood chilled. The word was out already, and I wasn't sure I felt prepared to protect myself from supernaturals. Not after what had happened at the museum. Focus on today. I scolded myself, turning onto campus and joining the flow of fresh-faced students rushing to their classes. In the last week, New Haven had transformed. More students than I ever could have imagined had flooded into town and walked the paths between brick and stone buildings. The leaves teetered on the edge of changing color, and the air had crisped, telling that fall truly was coming. My pulse quickened a touch as I lifted one hand to grasp the strap of my backpack. Being here, about to attend classes with the brightest young minds in the world, felt so weird. Like I was living someone else's life. But I wasn't. This, and working for the Coven, searching for the Pearl and maybe other dark artifacts after, was my life now. There was no more thieving to make the rich richer. Just studies, trying to pry darkness from the hands of those who would use it for evil, and watching my back for enemies. For Dens, and the Ringmaster, and the Ordo Eternum, and the mystery person or group who had the Pearl. My chest tightened. I still couldn't believe the Coven didn't have a lead on who possessed it, but I held faith they'd figure it out. Eventually, the person who took the Pearl of Hell for me would use it, and when they did, we'd be ready for them. I stopped walking and pulled out my phone, bringing up the campus map Harper had downloaded for me. The building my first class was located in should be around here somewhere. Before I could even zoom in on the image, someone slammed into me from the side, sending my phone flying from my hands to the ground. A crack sounded as the screen shattered. "Damn it!" I swore. "Watch where you're going, freak!" Forgetting my phone, my attention snapped toward the voice, to find Bentley Sloan smirking at me. "You're an asshole," I growled. "Better than an abomination." So, Skull and Bones had told him about shadows and secrets then. He knew we weren't human, but other. "Not so sure about that," I shot back, taking a step and scooping up the phone. As I suspected, the screen was trashed, but I could still make out the map. Kinda. Ugh, I did not need this added stress today. "So, what are you?" Bentley lowered his voice and sauntered closer. "A demon seems about right. Lucifer your daddy?" "None of your business." His face darkened. "You know, the Brotherhood works with aberrations like you, but we might not always. My family holds sway." His gaze drifted left and right. "And once I can convince them to obliterate monsters like you, not even your snitch of a protector will be able to save you. You need to watch your back, bitch." Snitch? What the hell is he talking about? The question vanished as Bentley's face grew impossibly smugger. It didn't matter what he said. Bentley was an ass, and he clearly had no idea the powerful forces he was dealing with. But he would soon. I closed the distance between us, pressing my finger to his chest. "Listen here, rich boy. I don't care who your family is, or what you think they can do. Screw with me, or shadows and secrets, and I'll turn you into a frog." His face faltered. "You can't." "You bet your ass I can." I lied, and his face paled. God, this was too easy. "As easy as this." I snapped my fingers in his face, and he jerked backward, the confidence he displayed seconds ago slipping from his face like rainwater. I logged that terrified expression firmly in my memory and whirled around, leaving Bentley Sloane standing there like an idiot. I filed out of my intro to biology class as though I was walking on a cloud. The class, while basic, had also been awesome, eye-opening, invigorating. It had been years since I'd been in a traditional school, and though I'd been scared to go back to that kind of structure, I was surprised to find that I'd actually missed formal education. Learning had always been fun, but as I had no memories from my life before the crash that killed my parents, I hadn't been so sure how I felt about school. As it turned out, I liked that too. Once in the corridor, I pulled out my phone, turning it on and frowning at the broken screen. During the lecture, I'd been able to forget about Bentley, but the cracked glass staring up at me brought him back to mind. I'd have to ask the Coven for a loan to fix it. Or maybe I could use my paycheck. When did I get paid for my mission? I made a note of my questions in my phone and pulled up the campus map again, squinting through the cracks. My next class was in 15 minutes, and only a few buildings away. Sweet. I could take my time, maybe grab a coffee beforehand. It was a basic math course, one of the credits I needed to fulfill my general education requirements. If any subject would put me to sleep, it was probably math. I went with the flow of students, exiting the building and hanging a hard right. It wasn't long before I was smiling and walking through a green space, old campus, as a sign I passed proclaimed. This was exactly what I envisioned being a student at Yale would be like. Old buildings of red brick towered around me, the smell of coffee lingering in the air from a passerby's cup, and a statue of some dude, probably a founder or whatnot, sitting in a prominent position in the middle of the green. Wanting to pause and soak in my first day, I stopped and leaned against the closest brick building, savoring the moment. Not counting my run-in with President Douchebag, the morning had begun intimidating and alien. But now, it was turning out to be magical. "Dad!" A girl of about 12 burst out from behind the statue and ran at a man I had not spotted before. "Dad! Look what I found!" "What is it, Mare?" "Mare?" My spine straightened, and I focused on the man, his tall, slender frame, his round glasses, his red hair. His gait was slightly awkward, and his oversized sweater with elbow patches was endearingly old-fashioned. I cocked my head, trying to place him. The man looked familiar, but also strange. Shifting my gaze, my attention went to the girl, dark-haired, and I sucked in a breath. One blue eye, one green. The girl was me. How? I pushed off the building and strode across the grass to the center of the green, all thoughts of my next class forgotten. "The statue, Dad! You rubbed the foot for luck!" Dad? That was my father? My heart rate kicked up as his image clicked into place in my mind. Yes, that was what he'd look like. How had I forgotten for all these years? How had he been so cloudy, so nondescript in my head? When here he was, so very alive. "Did you do it, Mare Bear?" The tween version of myself turned to him, eyes wide. "Duh!" Dad barked out a laugh, and though I had no memories of the man, the sound resonated within me, warm, comforting, familiar. "Well, what for?" "To get into Yale and be a professor like you." Professor? My father was a professor here? Best to aim higher, for your mother's position. I picked up my pace, not wanting to miss a word. Did they see me? Quickly, I glanced around. No one was watching me, so I waved. The two figures didn't turn toward me. So I wasn't here. That meant this probably wasn't real. I recalled then that Luca had told me I'd probably retrieve lost memories of my life. My hand flew to cover my heart. This was a memory from my past. For some reason, my father and I had come here. Did we live in New Haven? It didn't feel familiar. I'm going to teach archaeology, the younger version of me said proudly. Be like Indiana Jones. Hopefully not totally like him. Dad huffed. He doesn't treat the women in his life well. Not that part, little me assured him. And in the present, my heart swelled at my father's thoughtfulness. I was standing right next to them now, waiting for the next word, hoping to get a tiny tidbit of my past back. As I inhaled, I caught a whiff of cedar. Was that my dad's scent? It warmed me to the core, making me think it must be. We should get to my office, Mare Bear, Dad said. We're meeting your mother for lunch. Can we go to the sandwich shop? Of course. Rooms! Major news, Rooms! I gasped as the scene I'd been watching dissolved, where a second ago there'd been a father and a little girl. Nothing remained. No! No! Come back! I spun on my heel, taking in the green in one wild circle. A few people stopped at my shout, but most were too involved with their phones or conversation partners to notice. But even if every student at Yale had stopped to stare, I wouldn't have cared. For the first time in years, I'd seen my father, remembered him. We'd been together, happy, a family. No! A choked sob wrenched out of me as I gazed upon the spot where he'd disappeared. Rooms? A soft voice came from behind me. Shay's. What's wrong? Did I scare you? She saw something. Harper's voice rang out, confident and clear. What was it, Meredith? My father, I whispered, dragging my gaze to my roommates. A memory. I finally have a memory of my past. Oh, Shay breathed. Congratulations. Then she cringed. I interrupted it, didn't I? Slowly, I nodded, and she bit her lip. I'm so sorry, Mare. Had I known, I wouldn't have interrupted. You couldn't have, I said softly. More than anything, I wanted to rewind the clock and continue watching my father and me. Observe the past and what was probably a mundane day to us. But to me, it was everything. It wasn't real, I murmured, just in my head. And out here, like a movie. I don't get it. If it's a memory, why did it look like that? The girl stayed silent for a moment. Then Harper spoke up. I don't understand it either. Neither of us know much about memories resurfacing. I'm sure there's something about it in the Beinecke, though. The what? It's a library, Harper said. It has rare books, even a supernatural section, though no one can find it or see it but us, of course. I want to go to it, I said quickly. Can we? Now that my memories might be surfacing, I had hope. If there was a chance I could speed this process up, get moments of my old life and my parents back, I'd search the whole damn library. I'd read every book, every word, if only for another moment like what I'd witnessed. You'll need an escort to get in, since you're not registered in the supernatural section yet. Harper cut a glance at Shay. We don't have clearance to get you in. Luca, Tobias, or Hans would, though. Let's go get them! Actually, Shay stepped forward. We need to go to the Coven headquarters anyway. Something huge might have just happened. Frustration tinged with anger rose inside me. Right now, with my father's voice so fresh in my ears, nothing was more important to me than getting my memories back. I want to go to the library, I said firmly. I'm going to find Luca and demand he take me. Harper came closer. We understand, and you will. But Shay is right. This is super important. And I don't think Luca will have time to take you to the library. Look. She held out her phone, and I glowered at the pair of them. Meredith, this is important. Read it. Harper nodded downward. My jaw clenched, but something in the wolf's eyes made me do as she said. My gaze went to the screen, scanned the page. Then my eyebrows pulled together. I don't get it. What does this have to do with anything? We think everything, Harper said, her tone ominous. Chapter 28. Tobias. The back door of the blood bank swung open, and the hedge witch poked her head out, wild curls flying in the wind.
It's you this time. Thought Leisha would stop by.
The look on her face told me she didn't think it. She wished for Leisha to visit. Leisha had always been charming, and it had earned her an admirer. Nice to see you too, Mona, I replied wryly. I might be chopped liver, but I'm also the only vampire in town.
But the Coven wasn't scheduled to pick up for another week, right?
She ignored my jest and opened the door wider, inviting me in despite her obvious confusion. We had an incident, I gritted out. Meredith had required a transfusion, but in truth, most of the blood the Coven stored for vampires had gone down my own throat. It was the only way I could be around Meredith and suppress the urge to assert my dominance over her. Mona arched a sandy blonde eyebrow.
I see. Well, lucky for you. I'm prepared well in advance. How many bags?
50, she scoffed.
That's a lot more than normal.
We're about to embark on a dangerous series of missions. Mona's lips pressed together, and she turned on her heel, knowing better than to pry. Coven members didn't answer outsiders' questions about what went on in Shadows and Secrets.
This way.
I trailed the witch down the corridor, and soon enough a chill set in. After passing 3 doors, she stopped before a metal one. The cold would have tipped anyone off that this room was where they stored the blood, but my senses detected even more nuances. Inches of metal provided a strong barrier, and yet I could smell the metallic tang of the bag's contents, sitting on the other side. The moment she opened the door, I was nearly bowled over by several other aromas, some enticing, a few revolting, as it always was with human blood. Some people simply did not treat their bodies well, or their blood grew bitter as they held their demons and sins inside. An urge to fall to my knees and repent for the world, a notion instilled in me by my devout biological mother, crept in. No matter how many years passed, that impulse remained. I pushed it aside, as I did whenever my past tried to take hold. Mind if I take a look at what you've reserved for us? I asked the witch.
If you don't, I'd be worried something was wrong with you. Leisha usually spends an hour sniffing the bags before carrying them out. It's all over there.
She pointed to the right, at a long metal table weighed down with bagged blood. My lips curled up. She's pickier than I am, but there are some varieties I simply cannot stomach.
Makes sense. Hey, I have paperwork to do, and I'd rather not go up front. My co-worker microwaved kimchi before she left, and it smells horrendous up there. You won't be bothered if I stay in here and put on the news, will you?
My nose wrinkled at the thought of nuked kimchi. Not at all.
Sweet.
Mona pulled a stool over to a table cluttered with paperwork and turned on a small, ancient television.
If you have any questions, I'll be here.
I nodded and turned to the supplies the Coven required. As it was more common for my kind to drink the blood than for it to be used in our tomb's infirmary, the vampires of Shadows and Secrets took turns coming to the blood bank and picking up our stock. Mona had been our source for 3 years, and as such usually picked donors well. After a short 10 minutes, it became clear that, once again, Mona had done a splendid job. Of those on the table, I only pulled out 5 bags to swap. They were too sour-smelling, which wouldn't matter if the blood was only needed to heal injuries, but no vampire would want to drink something so tangy. I'd like to replace these. I held up the bags and turned back to the witch.
Sure thing. I took the liberty of setting aside some more just in case that happened. You can set those here.
She tapped a spot next to her.
And the replacements are on the next table over.
Mona pointed, unable to tear her gaze from the screen as she shook her head. What's going on? I walked over to see for myself, the blood still in hand.
Some crazy break-in. Apparently, there's this vault in Switzerland that hasn't been opened for decades, but someone broke into it.
She turned to look at me, brown eyes wide.
I guess someone owns it, but they never come to check on it. They make the payments and that's it.
I tilted my head. What was stolen?
One thing. A gemstone.
My heart gave a single, hard thump. How do they know?
There's a ledger of the contents in another safe owned by the same person, which, if you ask me, is even weirder. Anyway, once the break-in was discovered, the bankers checked what was left against the ledger.
Did it say what kind of stone?
Opal.
She shrugged as icicles of dread climbed down my spine.
The newscaster claims there were diamonds in there the size of golf balls. Why wouldn't they take those? Makes no sense.
Not to Mona, it wouldn't, but to me a single opal made all the sense in the world. I swallowed thickly as I set down the bagged blood. This was huge. I needed to return to S&S's hall. These 5 are all yours. I'll find 5 more and load up. I kept my tone level when all I wanted to do was bolt from the blood bank and call Luca. Had he seen the news? Probably not. If he was at the office, which was where he said he'd be, awaiting the shipment of blood. It was always a team effort to get the bags into Coven headquarters without regular people noticing. I turned back to the table Mona had noted earlier, determined to get this over with.
Need any help carrying stuff out?
She asked. I have it handled. The witch, helpful though she was, would only slow me down, and if my suspicions were valid, time had become more precious. Not bothering to resort to human-appropriate speeds, I sprinted back and forth from the van to the blood bank supply room. Mona watched me, her eyes widening each time I ran in for another armful. On the 7th and final trip, she shook her head.
If only you guys could compete in the Olympics, that would be something to see.
Humans would never win, I replied with a smile, though inside my anxiety continued to swell. Many thanks. We'll return on the regularly scheduled day next time. Hopefully, as long as I could get myself under control.
If you need more sooner, hit me up,
Mona said, clearly not believing a thing I said. Though she was a hedge witch, I believe she might have a special talent for teasing the truth from words. Good day. I zipped out the door and down the hallway. Reaching the van, I took great care to secure the bags. I might be in a rush, but the blood was a safety net the Coven required. Once I was satisfied everything was in place, I shut the door and hopped into the front seat. I'd no sooner started the van when my phone rang. Sliding my hand into my jacket pocket, hope rose within me that it was Luca, that he would already have answers. Regarding technology, the Coven master was old school, even more so than me, but he did have a cell phone, even if he kept it turned off and tucked away in his desk most of the time. Considering his position, it was not an ideal quirk to have, which everyone had told him at least a dozen times. However, he always pressed back that he knew when we needed help, and always answered, which was true too. But one glance at the screen and my hopes plummeted. It wasn't Luca, but my maker. I suspected she wasn't going to have good news. Giselle? I put her on speakerphone and placed the cell in the holder.
Did you see the news? The theft?
She replied, her tone low. Was she with the rest of the OA, hiding but desperate to get a message to me? I did. I began to drive. No matter what she said, I needed to get to headquarters fast. Was it you?
No. I was hoping it was you.
I paused, my mouth going dry. Unfortunately not. But it must be the opal. That's what you're thinking too, right?
It is.
She exhaled a lengthy breath.
The timing is too coincidental.
I agree. My shoulder muscles tensed. I don't suppose you know if the same symbol you told me was left in Cairo was found in the vault.
I don't. We're in Edinburgh, and no one will be there to check until they've figured out a plan. But the bank that was robbed has a reputation of never being penetrated, Tobias. It's the most secure place on earth.
I didn't know the bank's name. Either I'd missed it in the newscast, or they hadn't mentioned it. What's it called? I asked, suspicion rising.
Take a guess.
I swore. Le Bastion.
Correct.
Le Bastion had been a bank for thousands of years. Many prominent supernaturals kept their riches there, and only there. It was guarded by magic as well as modern technology. Whoever took the gemstone had done their homework. Has Raphael contacted you about this? I asked my sire. My brother held a vault in Le Bastion. This news would rightfully worry him. The sound of footsteps on the other end of the phone told me that someone was walking by. When I could no longer hear them, Giselle spoke again.
I'm not sure. I do not wish to involve him, not with the Ordo Eternum watching me so closely. Plus, and I believe he's a Castel Romano, and you know he has no phone in that blasted castle of his.
She paused.
Actually, you should go see your brother, Tobias. Not only for this. I worry for him. Fear he's been alone for far too long.
I turned the van onto a main road, nodding. I will. Eventually, once this is settled. There's something else regarding our family I need to ask you, Giselle.
If I can answer, I will.
Meaning if the vampire I asked about was ranked above her, and she was responsible for his or her secrets, she would hold her tongue. But silence would still be information. There weren't many Laurents who demanded my maker's allegiance. I recently was involved with a new blood who resisted my compulsion.
Pardon?
Her pitch rose.
How? That would mean...
A Laurent of my rank or higher made him. I'm not asking you who made the vampire, only if you've heard of any kin in this world who recently expanded our bloodline. There, that was a safe question. Nothing that would implicate my maker.
I haven't. I'm sorry to not be of help, Tobias.
An exhale parted my lips. I'll figure it out. I turned the van onto the Coven street and parked on the side of the road. At times like these, I wished we had a garage, but the hall S&S had been founded in was too antiquated. It looks like we both have mysteries to solve, I mused.
It does,
my maker agreed.
I'll let you know if I hear anything of the blood in this world, and the stolen item.
As will I. I turned off the van, feeling very near helpless. But for now, I must go.
Adieu, Tobias.
Goodbye, Giselle. We hung up, and I allowed only a moment of shock to rumble through me before dialing Hans. He said he'd come help me unload, making transport of the blood to headquarters fast and covert. Once we had finished the task, and were away from prying ears, the Coven would have to discuss what these new developments meant.
Chapter 29. Meredith. My legs burned as I sprinted behind the wolf and Nephilim, wishing I could talk and run at the same time. Shay and Harper had filled me in on the basics of what had them so worried, but I still had a million questions swirling in my head. The opal was probably a sacred stone. But what did it do? Did it have an ominous name like the Pearl of Hell? How did someone find it now, when it had been hidden for so long? How would the two stones react if they were together? Would a reaction even occur? Or did all 7 stones have to be in play for their combined effects to be sensed? We rounded the final corner that would put us on the Coven street, and I abruptly slowed my pace. On the sidewalk, Tobias, Hans, Silas the Fae, and Josiah the Necromancer were running to and from a white van with... is that blood? We keep it on hand for the vamps, Shay said, not breaking step, though she slowed as well. And injuries. Of course. I'd been the recipient of donated blood. At the thought of my time in the infirmary, my neck twinged. A reminder that, though I felt better, I might not be 100% quite yet. But won't people see? Hans probably cast an illusion spell over the area, Harper said. He's good at those, so passers-by without magic won't see what's happening. The only downside is illusions are short-lived, but it helps that Tobias parks so close to the Coven tomb. Right, I murmured, shocked an illusion could be so thorough. You guys need help? Shay asked when we were closer. This is the last bag, the silver-haired Silas said, grabbing a blood pouch and shutting both doors to the back of the van. Beluga called a meeting in the Shadow Room. I assume you heard the news. Shadow Room? Chills washed through me. I didn't even know where it was in the tomb, and that only made it clearer I needed to spend more time there and better familiarize myself with the society I'd thrown my lot in with. We did, Harper replied. I need details. Our foursome darted down the sidewalk and into the alley that hid the entrance to the Coven. Thankfully, Hans was already waiting at the door, so no one had to go through a magical ritual to enter. Stone? Harper? Shay? The wizard nodded at each of us in turn, his gaze lingering on the Nephilim for a beat longer than normal. You aren't missing class, are you? This is more important than a class, Hans. Shay rolled her eyes. And it's the first day. We won't do anything interesting. I agreed, though Harper didn't look so convinced. She'd come to headquarters out of duty, but I suspected she'd be freaking out about missing her class later. Just asking. Come on. We trailed Hans down the hall and through the atrium. Once we reached the other end of it, Silas split off. Have to take this to the freezer. Tobias is doing inventory. We'll be right there. Got it. We'll wait to start. Hans continued on until he reached a door about halfway down a hall I hadn't explored. When he opened it, we found 40 people sitting around tables arranged end to end to form a rectangle. As I scanned the room, Sarah, the strawberry blonde necromancer I'd met at the Griffin, threw me a shy wave. I returned the gesture. Opposite the door, Luca was leaning down the table to speak with Gunnar. When he sat upright and caught sight of us, the mage's dark eyes widened, and he waved in our direction. Given that there were only 3 empty seats around the Coven Master, and 4 of us, I assumed he wanted Hans, and began to follow Shay to a trio of empty chairs close to the door. Wait, Meredith. Hans turned, his blue eyes piercing me. He'll want to talk to you. Why? You're our seeker, and something we might want is lost. Come on. Our seeker? My skin tingled. It was still strange for me to belong somewhere positive. I'd basically been the ringmaster's property, but here, I was a Coven member. An equal. The Coven's seeker. With each passing day, it became more and more clear to me that I would stay. These people were my friends. Maybe one day, I could call them family. The memory of my father rose in my mind, making my heart clench. Until today, I'd almost totally forgotten how it felt to have a family. Now that I remembered, I didn't want to go on living without that feeling. No more running. No more hiding. A place to belong, I thought, passing Coven members who spoke in anxious voices about what the stolen opal could mean. Here, Hans. Luca pulled out the chair to his right. I could tell he wasn't feeling well again. His dark brown eyes looked dull, his skin clammy. On the other side of the Coven Master, Gunnar waved, still smiling despite the seriousness of the situation. Meredith, glad you could make it. Luca's dark brown eyes caught on me, settling there for a moment. The warmth the man embodied rushed over me. Please, sit next to Hans. Oh, thanks, I said, suddenly uncomfortable. No one was watching me, as the news of the opal was all-encompassing, but it still made me feel weird to be given a place of honor, so close to the Coven Master. We're waiting for Tobias and Silas, right? Hans asked. Not everyone in the Coven? Yes, the rest are either out of town or, like our healers, unavailable. Luca replied. 2 members returned from a mission with grave injuries. Others will catch them up later. The next second, the door to the Shadow Room opened again, and the vampire and Faye darted in. Silas took the first available seat, but Tobias swung around the formation tables, toward us. He looked so self-assured, so full of purpose. The vampire knew his place here. At that very instant, his emerald gaze snapped to me, and I swear his eyes burned into mine so hot it took my breath away. Inside my boots, my toes curled. What the hell? There was no denying Tobias was attractive. Scorching hot, even. I also couldn't deny I felt drawn to him, even though he tended to annoy the crap out of me most of the time. But that particular physical effect had never happened before. I ripped my eyes from his, locking them on the scarred wood of the table. Although I was no longer watching the vampire, I sensed when he walked by me, past Hans and Luca, and heard when he pulled his chair back and settled into it. Then, a pair of hands clapped, and Luca's voice boomed out. "It's time to begin." I exhaled, ready to be distracted by something other than Tobias. Dragging my gaze from the table, I focused on the mage leaning forward with his elbows on the table. Quiet fell, and others mimicked the Coven master's posture. While the atmosphere had been tense before, now the pressure mounted to uncomfortable heights. We were about to get answers. "Everyone here has heard of the bank heist in Switzerland?" Luca asked. "The stolen gem?" All around the table, heads nodded. "An opal." He scanned the room. "I'm assuming I'm not the only one who thinks this might be another sacred stone. Specifically, the opal of heaven." A shiver ran down my spine. Yep, that was another ominous name. "It almost certainly is," Tobias confirmed. "I have information that it wasn't any ordinary bank that was looted. It was Le Bastion." A few people looked confused, but many more sucked in a gasp. Whatever Le Bastion was, it was major. "The most secure bank ever to exist has been broken into, and another sacred stone taken." Luca leaned back and let out a soft breath, the effort of sitting upright apparently too much for him. "The question is, does anyone have any idea who could have coordinated such a heist?" "It's not Ordo Eternum," Tobias said. "They were, of course, my first thought, but I have knowledge it can't be them." Luca nodded. Whatever Tobias knew, he had already heard and agreed with. "Any other ideas?" Again, silence shrouded the room. Luca cut Tobias another glance, and the vampire inclined his head, as if giving permission for something. "Apparently, this symbol was found in the Egyptian tomb in which Meredith found the Pearl of Hell." The mage waved a hand, and flames flew up, creating a symbol. It was an upside-down triangle, its ends extending past the tip and curling outward at the bottom where it intersected with a V. Inside the inverted triangle, an X had been drawn, for the top two corners of the triangle, and its ends also strayed outside the confines of the three-pointed shape. My eyebrows pinched together. I didn't recognize the intricate shape at all. "That's the sigil of Lucifer," Josiah the necromancer noted. "It is. Does anyone know of an underground organization using this? One that perhaps might be interested in the 7 lapis calesti?" Luca spoke to everyone, but when his eyes landed on Hans, they stuck. The wizard stiffened. There was something in the exchange, something I didn't understand, but judging by how Hans swallowed and shifted in his seat, he was uncomfortable. Luca sighed. "I'd hoped someone would have information, but I see now that whatever individual or group is responsible has hidden their presence well." "We need to suss them out," Silas said, his strange silver eyes blazing. "And determine if they really were responsible for the theft at Le Bastion," Tobias added. "If they were, they would have likely marked the area again. Claimed it." "Precisely. A sharp gasp cut through Luca's words, and the mage's hands flew to his throat. I twisted, in time to see the moment his veins darkened to black, to see the beads of sweat appear on his skin. He stood, his brown eyes widening, his expression growing wild, terrified. Blood thrummed in my veins as my pulse began to race. What was happening? Gunnar rose from his seat. "What's happening, man?" "Luca?" Tobias also leapt to his feet. His attention raked over the mage, and suddenly, he dipped to pull a blade from his boot. When he stood tall again, he drew the weapon across Luca's upper arm. The mage's eyes shuttered closed, and his knees buckled. Quick as a flash, Gunnar darted forward to catch him before he hit the floor. A loud moan rang from Luca's lips, but his body looked limp, his face grayer than before. "What's happening?" I whispered, my heart ticking irregularly in my chest, making my breath thin and weak. Tobias's attention shifted to me, and goosebumps erupted along my arms. When our eyes locked, it was like the rest of the world faded away. Or at least it was like that for me. Tobias appeared able to break our connection easily. He refocused the dagger, swiping a bit of blood from the tip with a finger and touching it to his tongue. He dropped the dagger. "No." Fear laced the vampire's voice. "What is it?" Gunnar asked. "He's shaking." "Shade poison. His blood's full of it," Tobias replied. "What? How could he not realize?" Hans shouted. "Their poison is supposed to be beyond painful." "Bet your ass he did know," Gunnar said, crossing his arms over his barrel chest. "His skin reeks of herbs." "Yes," Tobias agreed. "I've smelled them too, and heard him ask the healers for a draught while Stone was in the infirmary. I thought they might be to sleep, but now I believe Luca has been taking potions to heal. You two remember what he looked like before?" Both the wolf and the wizard nodded gravely. An image of Luca on the couch, sweating and weak, popped into my mind. He'd looked horrible then, but gotten better for a while. Likely the elixirs were simply getting him through the day. Bloody proud mage. Tobias echoed my line of thinking as he focused on the Coven master, trying to decode his choices. But it seems they aren't working anymore. He twisted, and a lock of dark brown hair fell into his eye, making my breath hitch the weirdest way. "Gunnar, get him to the infirmary. We'll be right behind." The wolf didn't hesitate. He shifted Luca in his arms as if the mage weighed nothing. Once the Coven master was secure, Gunnar bolted from the room. The rest of those in the shadow room began to crowd around us, questions lining their faces, but Tobias held up his hands. "We only know that Luca has shade poisoning. Now, we have to figure out what to do about it. Everyone, steer clear of the infirmary. I'll lead this. Hans?" "With you. Meredith, you come too." "I don't know anything about shades, other than how they stank to high heaven and one had tried to bite my ear off. Not that any of that would help the Coven master. My stomach plummeted. Luca was ill, and it was partly my fault. After all, the shade had been coming for me. Hans's blue eyes pierced mine. "Maybe not, but I have a feeling we might need you anyway." Chapter 30. Tobias. By the time our trio reached the infirmary, the healers were already hard at work. Gunnar stood off to the side, uncharacteristically silent as he watched. Stepping over the threshold into the sterile room reeking of antiseptic and disease made me want to punch a wall. The memories of Meredith in here were too fresh, too raw, too unwelcome for a creature like me, who could never live with developing strong feelings for a mortal. Not again. Not after what happened last time. "How is he?" Hans approached the mage, who lay still in a bed in the main room. He was the only occupant, though 2 other Coven members were under the healer's care. Their injuries were so dire they required more privacy, as Meredith had needed. That the healers hadn't placed Luca in a private chamber meant they were either in denial or hopeful. I wished for the latter, but wasn't holding my breath. "Unconscious," the lead healer, Daphne, said, blue eyes flashing up at us. She rose, and her long blonde ponytail slithered over her shoulder. She jerked her head, tossing it back in annoyance.
Tobias, Gunnar said you tasted shade poison?
It's flowing strongly within him.
The healer nodded. When he came in after the attack, we gave him a remedy for shade venom. He healed, or he appeared to, but this... She gestured down to the mage, his chest fluttering softly as he strained for breath. This is not normal. The poison seems to be strengthening over time.
We believe the attack was targeted at someone else, to kill them. I refrained from cutting a glance to Meredith, though I felt the witch stiffened at my side.
But we've dealt with shade poison before, the healer affirmed. We know how to rid the body of such venom. How Luca's worsening makes no sense.
The room stilled. This was not good. Our healers were among the best in the world. Of course, magic had many mysteries, but it was rare the Coven's healers did not know what to do. Hans stepped forward. Will more elixir fix him? Daphne's eyes darted to the Coven master, and then back to the wizard.
I'm not sure. He's declining rapidly, and we'd already given him quite a strong dose.
The strongest possible?
Not yet. That's just as dangerous. As always, the poison is in the dose.
He's already in danger, Gunnar argued. Give him the heaviest dose possible. Luca is strong. He can take it.
Daphne sighed. Maybe, but there's no way to test that.
And why not? My tone was tight with frustration.
I'm nearly out of ingredients. Luca's been drinking so much elixir, and I haven't had time to contact our supplier. Lucimisia, the herb I need, is rare. Only grown in one spot in this realm.
This realm? I swallowed. That indicated it was grown elsewhere. It's native to Asila? I asked. Perhaps I could procure some quickly. I might be working against the Laurent king, but he didn't know that. As long as the herb grew in another kingdom of Asila, I could enter and leave without my bloodline ever knowing. Theoretically, anyway.
If only, Daphne replied. It's a plant native to Hell, and has been transplanted here, but only in one place. The environment is quite specific, requiring volcanic gas and extreme heat. Plants can grow in Hell?
Meredith piped up. She'd been so silent I'd almost forgotten she was there.
How does it grow? What about the lava? Isn't there lava there? It's rare, but yes, a few plants grow in Hell, Daphne answered, her tone softer. As for the lava, I can't speak to that. Never been there, thank the goddess.
Can we get it? I pressed, wanting to get the conversation back on track.
I'll contact our supplier. Someone will have to go get the Lucimisia, though, because I can't leave Luca. However, the field's location is well hidden, so it won't be easy.
Sounds like a job for a seeker, Hans muttered. And me. For a moment, anger rose inside me, but I beat it down. I might not like the thought of Hans and Meredith together, but he was right. If Meredith could help, she had to go, and she needed backup. We couldn't allow the mission to take too much time and risk Luca's life.
Let me call the supplier, Daphne said. I'll be right back.
The healer murmured a word of instruction to her apprentice, who'd been listening to our exchange silently, and left the room with the younger witch. The moment the four of us were alone, our gazes strayed to our Coven master. He must have been in an extraordinary amount of pain. Why hadn't he said anything? Before anyone could go to Luca's bedside, or even utter a word, the door to the infirmary burst open.
How is he?
Shay blurted, rushing inside along with Harper. My lips compressed. You shouldn't be here.
Whatever, Tobias. You may be Luca's right hand, and others might be too scared to cross you, but you aren't in charge.
Hey now, Gunnar said, tone light to diffuse the Nephilim's obvious anger. What are Hans and I, chopped liver? Harpo rolled her eyes.
You guys are all leaders, but we don't care. What's happening?
She looked to Meredith, who drew in a shaky breath. I stepped in front of the witch, shielding her, though I wasn't sure why when there was no threat present. The motion did not go unnoticed by Harper. She arched a ginger eyebrow, but said nothing. "Shade poison," I answered. "We need more of a certain herb, but it's not close by. The healers are calling now. Daphne stormed into the room. "We have a problem." Everyone whirled to face her, and I stiffened. Her face was hard, anxious, filled with fear. "What's up, Daph?" Gunnar prompted. "You all right?"
Not at all. Luca won't be either.
Her hands shook as she spoke.
Our suppliers' crops were set to flame the other day.
"What?" Hans growled, his blue eyes darting to me as he worked through what this meant. Whoever had set the shade for Meredith and injured Luca knew they'd done harm. How, I wasn't sure. But it was the only thing that made sense. Now, they wanted to weaken our coven, deprive us of the only source of remedy we had. Was there a traitor in the coven? Someone that had informed the mystery enemy of Luca's decline? Or had the attacker simply hedged their bets? My gaze locked with Hans's, and I suspected he was thinking along the same lines.
It's gone! All of it!
Tears filled Daphne's eyes, and silence fell over the group, spreading and creeping into the corners of the infirmary until it choked the room. "Then it looks like we need to go with Plan B." Hans broke the quiet. There was a strain to his voice, and I alone understood why. I turned to the wizard. "You can get there? There's the way." He lifted his chin as if daring me to ask, daring me to out him. I had too much dangerous knowledge as it was. There was no way I'd ask where an entrance to hell was located. And despite how we often butted heads, I wouldn't out the wizard either. I owed him. "Which guy's talking about?" Gunnar came closer, as did the ladies. All wore confused expressions, which was completely reasonable. To them, Hans was merely a wizard. But that was not the truth. Once, the man had saved me. Once he'd been a partner who opened his veins so that I might survive a mission. Once, he revealed a dangerous, dark secret that he kept hidden from the world. Hans wasn't just a wizard, and if we were to save our Coven master, he was the best person in the Coven to procure Lucimisia. "I have certain attributes that will allow me to journey to hell," he said finally. All around, eyes narrowed as the others considered what those attributes might be. "But I can't go alone," he continued. "I have a general idea as to where this Lucimisia herb is, but not a precise location. I'll need help with that. I hate to say this, but I need Meredith to go too." My fists clenched as my blood began to boil. No, she wasn't going to hell. I wouldn't allow it. I might be conflicted about the witch, but I knew one thing. If she left this world, I would inch closer to insanity. "She can't go." No sooner were the words out of my mouth than Meredith stepped forward.
1, you're not the boss of me. 2, I don't want to go, but if it means saving Luca's life, I will.
She sought Daphne's gaze.
"And that is what it means, isn't it?" "I'm afraid so," the healer replied. "Then I'll go." "No!" Shay's tone was strangled. "Mare, it's so dangerous." "Obviously," Harper muttered. "It's hell. And what makes you think you can get through, Hans?" He shook his head, not about to divulge his secret. "I just know I can. I know a way, and I—" "Then I'll go too." Shay cut him off, tears brimming in her clear blue eyes. "Mare is our roomie, our friend. You two can't go alone." "Don't be ridiculous." Harper whirled on the Nephilim. "You're part angel. The demons will sense you right away. You'll endanger anyone you're with." "But Meredith closed the distance between her and the Nephilim. "Hans and I will go. Doesn't the Coven have other stuff to focus on? Like researching that vault?" My eyes widened,
In all the commotion, the theft of the opal of heaven had been forgotten. But Meredith was right. We needed to go to the vaults in Le Bastion, needed to learn who it belonged to, and if they had information on the opal, if they might have a hunch who took it.
And we require the Lucimisia quickly, within the week, 2 at the most. Luca won't last longer than that,
Daphne said before adding,
If you can get a lot, bunches with the roots attached, that would be best. Then our supplier has a chance of regrowing, and no one will have to do this again.
That settles it then, Hans said. We'll leave tonight. Meredith will need a bundle of Lucimisia to help her seek. Can you spare it, Daphne? Some invisibility potion, too.
I keep the ladder on hand, but remember, it has limits.
The healer exhaled a worried breath.
I'll keep just enough Lucimisia to make Luca another batch of elixir, which means you two really must hurry.
What about the pearl, though?
Hopper pressed. Meredith has to find that, too.
Yeah, but until signs of madness start popping up, I'm kind of useless. Meredith pointed out. I can't search the whole globe. I need a place to start, a general vicinity at the very least. Luca was waiting for that before sending me. Plus, Luca's gotta be well to hide the pearl when we get it, Gunnar said. We need the mage to access his magic safe, or whatever he calls it. He's the only one in the Coven who can. They were all right. Though Luca claimed one other person in the world could get into his safe, a protection should he perish, no one held the knowledge of who that person was. Now that Luca was so ill, this seemed a gross oversight. My chest tightened at all the uncertainty. I couldn't help but think that Luca would know exactly how to handle this. I'm going with Hans, Meredith reiterated. We were at an impasse, and the best way to move forward was to let go of this desire to both be around Meredith and distance myself from her. I needed to stay busy, to have a quest of my own. I'll work on getting into Le Bastion, I said suddenly. Gunnar shook his head. I won't be able to sit here and wait. Do you think you'd have need for a wolf, Hans? Conflict rippled across the wizard's face. He was thinking of denying the alpha blood. He's an excellent fighter, I murmured. Taking too many would be folly, but you'll probably need help fighting off creatures of the underworld. Invisibility potion only lasts so long, Novak. Hans glared daggers at me, but eventually let out a huff. Gunnar, you can come.
Well, then I'm coming with you, Tobias,
Shay said. I wanted to refuse her, wanted to say this was a job best suited to working alone, but after I'd forced Gunnar on Hans, it would look hypocritical. Plus, the truth was I didn't know that working alone would be beneficial. No one had ever broken into Le Bastion, not until today. I might require Nephilim magic. Very well, I said. We'll leave tonight, too.
Chapter 31. Hans.
The door slammed behind me, and my nose wrinkled. The air in my home was stale, sour. The trash needed taking out. When had I last been home? When I'd retrieved Meredith? I shook my head. I'd been spending too much time at headquarters again. That would come as no surprise to anyone, least of all me. I always preferred Shadows and Secret's tomb, even sleeping on a stiff cot in the basement, to my own home. This put-together dwelling, so modern and beautiful it would make my father faint, was one place where I couldn't escape my past, nor what I'd left behind. Weak. I was so weak. I couldn't face coming home because it reminded me of a duty I'd long given up on fulfilling. Briefly, I closed my eyes, and an image of the shack I'd grown up in appeared in the back of my eyelids, instantly adding to my torment. Ah! My eyes flew open, and I marched into the kitchen, flinging open the fridge. Thank the goddess. I reached for the beer that had appeared inside. The fridge that provided whatever a person wanted had proven to be well worth the time Luca and I had put into charming it. Especially now, when all I wanted to do was drink myself into oblivion and forget. Popping the cap, I turned. and hurled the metal disc into the general direction of the trash, not even caring when it pinged off the edge and rolled across the floor to rattle to a stop under the dining table I'd only used twice. I stomped into the living area and slumped onto the couch, my gaze straying to the drawer in the coffee table I kept locked, hidden, like so much of myself.
"Look at me,"
it seemed to call.
"It's been so long."
My fingers itched to touch the contents of the drawer. Within seconds, I recognized refusing the call was futile. "This won't go well," I muttered, and pulled the key from its secret compartment on the underside of the coffee table. The metal was covered in dust, which I wiped on my pant leg before inserting the key into the drawer's locking mechanism. With a twist and a gentle tug, I revealed the larger compartment, inch by inch. A book of photographs stared back at me, its red cover faded. The smell of my father's fresh-baked kozanак, a treat he made more often than our neighbours, had long since disappeared from the material binding the pictures. And yet, I swore I could smell the festive bread from my homeland, mixed with the scent of old yellowed paper. I inhaled, hoping to taste the sweet bread too. Failing, I frowned. That's the way it was with my past. The good parts were always an inch out of reach. But the bad haunted me. Now that I was going back to Romania, going home, there would be no avoiding my family, my mistakes, where I came from or what I was. So why try? I opened the book and flipped to the middle, only to feel like I'd been punched in the gut. Snow-capped mountains rose, a picturesque backdrop to an image of a little blonde girl. She smiled at the camera, her curls falling in perfect ringlets, her teeth straight and gleaming, her eyes black as night. My mouth went dry, and I swallowed another glug of beer, trying to force down the pain rising inside me. It wouldn't be long after we stepped foot in my secluded village that Meredith and Gunnar would learn my secret. My shame. There was no way I could hide it. Not when the villagers knew. Tobias would no longer be the only one clued into the darkness inside of me. The very part of me that, ironically, was the key to healing Luca, a man I'd do anything for, including travel to the pits of the underworld. Was I doing the right thing by allowing Gunnar and Meredith to join me? Despite his fun guy exterior, the wolf was hard as nails, a fighter to his core, and though I barely knew her, I suspected the witch was too. After all, she also had a rough past, and had gotten herself out of many binds. But this, my homeland, the realm we were about to enter, was more than rough. It was the stuff of nightmares. And I was connected to hell in a way I could not deny, no matter how hard I tried. I just hoped that when the Seeker and the Wolf learned of the darkness inside me, they wouldn't look at me differently.
This has been Seeker of Secrets, Coven of Shadows and Secrets, Book 1, by Ashley McLeo, narrated by L.C. Johnson. Copyright 2022 by Ashley McLeo. Production copyright by Ashley McLeo.